get them from you when you bring them.
Yeah.
Back.
My suggestion is go back to these two.
We are reconvening the planning commission meeting for today, which is February 4th. And now we are on to implementation programs. Page 7.
Could I make a suggestion, Fawn?
Sure.
Just in the order of which we're taking things, we're jumping back and forth between goals and policies and then implementation measures. And I would think it would be better for today if we went to the implementation measures now for those elements or sections of the element that we covered this morning.
Just because it's fresher.
Yeah, because they're fresh in our mind, and we can't help the fact that we skipped over some earlier. So if we went to the implementation measures for scenic resources, recreation, and cultural, et cetera,
Sure, I
now
think,
we could get them out of the way.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Do you guys agree?
Agreed.
And then in the future, always deal with both sides together, even though they're not laid out that way. So we move from a section to a section, having done the whole thing.
Do you have any?
There's a little bit of overlap there, but that'll work fine.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
I mean,
for
occasionally
me.
we'll have, maybe some measures that implement goals or policies in a variety of different sections. But I think for the most part, that'll work.
Okay. You guys all agree? All right. All right, so now, with that, we are moving to page 21, scenic resources, the implementation measures. We'll do that, recreation, and then cultural resources, and then we will go back.
Well, actually, there's one that seems to fit with the scenic part, and that's COS-A at the top of page 17.
The open
So,
space zoning district?
I'm not sure where it fits, actually, but
it's a general one. I guess it's meant to fit. In general,
Right.
right.
I highlighted that.
Is there, should, we can include that in the discussion now?
Well, yeah.
Okay,
okay, I think we discussed that a little bit this morning.
all right. So would you want to start there, and then we'll go to page 21?
I think that would make sense.
Okay. That's fine with me.
Okay,
Unless I
and-
hear any objections, well, that's what we'll do.
Okay, and on that one, we did discuss it this morning, and the way it's written, it seems to be an open-ended tool to preserve or manage unique, important, or significant natural and cultural resources, as if the county would just create this district and you couldn't do anything on it. I gather somewhat from the discussion this morning that that's not exactly what's intended, that what this is a, or supposed to be, is a tool to be used in connection with clustering as a way to have a district to put the open space part of the parcel that's going to have the cluster development into. But if that's what it's supposed to do, it's not written that way.
That's one aspect of how an open space zone could be used. It could also be used for identifying either public land or private land that has been established for the purpose of some type of conservation or open space type of use. So, for example, I think I mentioned, if someone had acquired land for the specific purpose of let's say, offsetting impacts to oak woodlands or riparian habitat or something like that. And then that then is identified as the open space, which is mitigation for some other project somewhere else. So it's not just simply clustering. That is one way it could be used. I think that the concern that you have is that the county is just going to sort of arbitrarily, not necessarily arbitrarily, but designate private property as an open space zone which would remove most, if not all, economic value of property. And that's certainly not the intent, and if there's a way that we can craft that language so that that's clear, that's not what's going to happen. I don't know if that satisfies your concern.
I think it might help me if you kind of repeated what you previously mentioned. This is one of the problems of our going back and forth like this, but what you previously described as a definition of what an open space zoning district is, or legally, what's the legal?
It depends on how it's
Instrument.
defined in our zoning ordinance, but the zone, an open space zone is typically something that is land that's been identified as open space that would not be developed in other type of land uses. And there, it could be used for recreation purposes, it could be used for, conservation purposes, water recharge. There's any number of reasons that land is identified and established as open space. But the concern I hear is that the county would somehow unilaterally determine that this land is open space, and that's certainly not the intent.
But if you have it in resource production, that pretty much makes it open space. So why would we need this?
Well, resource production does also allow a lot of other uses, including residential uses, horticulture. The purpose of the open space is to maintain habitat or some other, recreation purposes, not necessarily consistent with the land use designation and the consistent zoning that would go along with resource production.
So there would
It could be, but not necessarily always would be.
There would be on this map. an
No,
open-
not on that map.
It wouldn't show up here as an open space land designation that corresponds to a zoning.
Okay, yeah, yes,
Designation.
if lands were zoned open space, it would end up showing up on that map. But the primary source of that information would be the county zoning map. So,
So when we have a piece of property that becomes a designation of open space and it's separated out from a development or whatever the use is going to be, a park, whatever, we don't have a special zoning for that category to fall in? It still holds the same zone as what it was being pulled apart from?
yes,
Okay. So all
We
you're
currently
doing
do not
is
have
saying
an
that
open
when
space
you
zone.
separate something out, here's your development area, here's your open space area, I want a zone that the open space is going to be in.
that's often what happens.
You're not going to go out there and decide this is going to be an open space zoned area. It has to be part of a designation out of a hearing of some sort.
Well, that's one way that the open space zone could be utilized.
Okay, I remember from the discussion at this point that I made that if you've got a large parcel and there's been a clustering design to accommodate, to create open space. Once that's done, my view is that land is locked up. It's because you've taken these measures to move your
Right.
your density down here, this is now open space. And I think your comeback was to really lock it up, then you take that
Well,
chunk
it's
and you
more
say
to
that's-
identify what's, and the open space zone that I've seen, in other districts I've seen, or in other jurisdictions, is, there are some limited uses that are allowed within the open space. It's consistent with the purpose of that open space. Recreational uses, there might be, trails through the wildlife habitat or whatever it might be. Those kind of, passive recreation uses are okay. You might have, under restroom facilities or, there's any number of uses that are compatible with the open space, depending on the purpose of the open space. If it's recreation, if it's open space for recreation, you might have, a variety of different recreation uses compatible with the type of recreation it's being used for. So it is used more as a means to identify and clarify what uses would be permitted within that open space.
Okay. Without this open space zone district, in the scenario that we're talking about where the clustering is created in open space, it's just left dormant, or it's let,
Well, it would be subject to whatever conditions are imposed as a part of that project. So typically, where you're doing clustering, you would have a plan development, where you've transferred, you cluster development. And so the PD itself would have basic rules of what can be done in that area. And that would be the guiding, that would be the requirements of what can and cannot be done within that open space area. But that means someone's going to go back up and sort of dig up that document that 20, 30, 40 years from now, someone's going to have, okay, what can we do in this open space? So it's in condition numbers 14 and 32 of subdivision map such and such that, establishes the provisions of what can be done there.
okay, so you're saying an option that this purports to address is that developer can say, county, you can designate this open space created by my clustering effort as an open space zone. You can designate it as open space zone for the purpose of, and let's agree on what that purpose is going to be.
Yeah.
Between the developer and the county. County says, well, we'd like people to be able to park their car and walk through the property, or I don't know what, do what. And so that becomes the subject of whether or not the developer agrees with what the county thinks the public might benefit from in this open space zone.
Yes.
Otherwise,
yeah.
it's just a bunch of property that is maintained by whatever laws are required for it to be maintained by, but that's it. And you're saying this is something the developer can agree or disagree with. The county can say, we'd sure like to be able to do something with that open space that you have created that benefits.
Well, typically what happens is, and we have a number of policies that are trying to encourage that kind of clustering. So then you've got this area that's not being developed.
Right.
How do you identify that? How do you control it so that it serves the purpose that it was designed for? And typically when the project goes through, we will sit down and work with the applicant. Often they have ideas of what they want to use it for. And it could be, they want to enhance it for recreation purposes for the residents of the subdivision. Maybe there are resources that are critical, Native American cultural resources or biological resources that sort of have to be left alone. So it sort of depends on what's there and how it's going to be used, and that's all part of the subdivision review process.
Would it work to say something like, and I haven't got this completely figured out, but it seems like what you need to have is create an open space zoning category
Instead of district.
instead
Well,
of
a district, and maybe,
in which you can, which would identify lands which have been dedicated to a particular purpose.
I think the word district is what's scary.
Yeah, 'cause
how
that-
would we just say open space zone?
Period.
or just zone, yeah.
Yes. It was the district that kind of
Yeah.
weirded me
Yeah.
out there. It
Yeah.
was, but let me see if I can run through another scenario that you say this would comply, this would be a way to go about it. You've done this clustering as the developer, and now everybody, instead of having 5 acres, they've got a half an acre or 1 acre, something.
Whatever, yeah.
All right? Now you've got this big open space. Could not the developer, through this tool, fence that off and say, okay, your parcel in this development isn't big enough for a horse, but here's 40 acres that we've got that's zoned open space, and we can put a barn on that, and everybody who wants a horse can put their horse on that property and in that barn, and you get together on how you're going to maintain it and all that stuff. Is that a possibility?
That's possible. There are projects that have vineyards
A vineyard.
on open space. And that's, I think, what we talked about with the resource production is, by clustering the housing component, you still could have that productive,
Or
it could be
trails,
grazing, or it could be horses.
picnic
it could be
benches and stuff like that.
all kinds of things, yeah.
Okay.
I have a question.
So the open space zone would have to be designed to have the flexibility to allow the kinds of improvements appropriate to the purpose for that open space. So if it's intended for recreation, then recreation purposes are
Well,
permitted.
but the purpose is kind of a problem, I think, because the purpose might be just to create open space. The purpose of the clustering might be just to create open space because the county says it wants open
Could be
space.
visual resources.
Or it could be topographically, you had to do
Yeah,
it.
right.
So tying it to the purpose limits what you can do with it because there may have been no real purpose other than it is what it is.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that there's not an advantage to doing something with it that either benefits the people in that development or by negotiation, everybody. I don't know.
Right.
I
Exactly.
think for identification
So,
purposes. it's good.
Conceptually, I'm good with it
Okay.
in that light. But I
Yeah.
just-
Kelly, what was the language you had? You wanted to replace zoning district with zone, but then you had some other, you didn't write it down, so.
Write it down.
Go
Let
on.
me try it again.
Might not tell
Be
you.
something like creating open space zone in category or just zone or equivalent as a means to identify land that has been dedicated for particular open space purposes.
Oh, boy, you changed all of that.
I think Mr. Wooster is onto it because this one targets significant natural and cultural resources. And the way we've discussed how this zone category would be used might have nothing to do with natural and cultural resources. It might be just, hey, here's a good thing we can do with this open space. So create the open space zone or equivalent, whatever that would be, as a means of more effectively utilizing open space created by some other vehicle, meaning clustering and the like.
Well, I think it would help identify it too, because I thought part of the concern was years down the road, people would have to go do a lot of research to figure out why is this restriction here if it's here? And if you had it readily available in a zone,
Right.
then that tells you,
It's a lot clearer, especially to future property owners.
right.
Yeah.
So what I have then is create an open space zone or equivalent as a means to identify lands which have been dedicated to open space purposes. That what you said?
I have a question.
Yes.
What about an individual like me, not a corporate entity, but just a person, and he has a few acres and he wants to put it in an open space zone? Can he do that? Or does it have to be part of a big project?
You could apply for a zone change to do that, if that's what you wanted to.
But would he have to specify what its purpose is?
You would have to do a lot line adjustment.
No,
It would be a zone amendment,
it'd be a zoning amendment.
right?
No, not if he's going to carve out the area around his
No,
house.
no, no, he's got a
Well-
2-acre parcel and he just wants
Oh,
to
it's
change.
separate, it's already
Separate,
separate.
it's just one 2-acre parcel and he just wants to get it rezoned to open space. Could he do that? That's the question.
Yeah.
And then
if
the
so,
further
does
on,
he have to specify what it's being reserved for?
well, you'd still own it.
Yeah.
And it would be whatever the zone stipulates as far as, typical uses or allowable uses or whatever.
And then if somebody wanted to change it down the road, they'd
They
have to go in
could,
and get a zoning
that's right,
change.
yes.
Yeah.
You would have downgraded your property.
Well, downgrading, it's a subjective opinion. And he may be thinking he's
downgraded
upgrading.
the value of the property.
Again,
The-
that's,
the market value
eye of the
of it.
beholder.
For some purpose that you think is worthwhile.
Right.
So, just for clarity purposes, if somebody is doing a project and they're going to designate open space, who's going to pay for that zone change? Or is that something that you will just roll into?
That would be rolled into the project.
That'll be documented somewhere? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, I could see, okay, well, this is going to be the open space, now you have to pay for a zone change and smacking them down again.
It would all be part of the
It's all part of the
the
development
project,
project
okay, development
application,
project, yeah. So I'm
Y'all
good
heard
with that change.
Okay.
You
Good.
guys?
Good.
Yeah, all right. Let's move on. So now we are going back to page
21?
21. So these are implementation measures for scenic resources.
Are we on 4A?
Yes?
I don't think I have a problem with 4A.
Okay, anyone, everyone's good with 4A?
You could take that last parentheses off. I mean, I think you could just put the period after landscape and remove e.g. clustering in quotation marks because it's pretty clear about what it's defining. You know how I hate the word clustering.
I'm not fond of EGs, it was just sort of there left over from,
Yeah, just, if
Prior
we could
version.
remove that and put a period after landscape, I would be okay. That's my only note on that.
All right, I'm good with that.
Fine here.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
4B?
I have a 4B note that I want to start with because to me 4B reads the same as 4C. Convince me that I'm wrong. I mean, in terms of the effect of it.
Well, doesn't 4B
That's
do the designating?
Right, and 4C
And then
is the...
4C says, after you've already got it designated, here's the standards that tell you what you can do and can't
Right.
do.
Right.
right.
Then isn't that no, that's not an implementation measure?
No, the
There's
standards would be...
two separate steps in the process, I guess. Once we designate it, then we need to come up with standards. I mean, I suppose they could be combined, but it's just easy to have them separate.
Okay. The fact that they're separate doesn't matter to me. It's just to me they overlap. But I understand the difference now. Thank you.
I have a whole different issue. Let me just read this word one more time to make sure I'm okay with scenic. So it's just considering, because every time we take on a state scenic highway or a federal scenic designation, with that comes a lot of government control. We've already witnessed it, we've already felt the effects of it, and I'm opposed to doing that any further than what's already been done. I know that there was one of them being worked on Highway 49 so that they could get state dollars for road funds, but every time we do something like that, with that comes a lot of negative effects, a lot of control of the state over our roads through our towns. I mean, we're not talking about a highway going down a freeway that's not affecting our small towns. We're talking about affecting our small towns, mom and pop businesses, every time something runs through there, and then the state has controls over us. So I have real issues with that, but that's just my opinion. And I am speaking from experience because my office fell into that designation, and it has an effect on my business. So when we're looking at bringing in more state and federal designations, that's not something I want to be looking at considering when I look at all of the attachments that come with it and the rules.
So I'm just curious, what effect does it have on your business?
It affects me being in that designation on that highway as a business, what kind of signs I can put up and down. And if you are a new business coming in and you're in that scenic byway, you aren't going to be doing that because your signage is obsolete at that point. Because now it's scenic, they have all those controls. It's going to affect what your building's going to look like in that process. There are so many impacts. And once you take those dollars, whether it be federal or state, you get all of the restrictions that come with it. I don't have the Federal Scenic Byway program in front of me. I wish I had, because there is a list of regulations that are very damaging to small towns. When it starts from outside of town going up the highway where there isn't little towns in between, I think it's great. But when it starts hurting what's in town, I don't think it's a good thing. That's just my personal opinion. And I'm one of 5, so you guys can speak all you want.
Well, I like hearing from somebody who lives in this kind of an area because I don't feel it down where I live. I don't. But when it comes to these designations, can you carve out the town that it's running through?
No.
You got to take it all or nothing.
You could probably set boundaries and say from point A to point B, because
Right.
that's what they did on Highway 4 with, they picked up just the edge of Arnold and then went all the way up to Alpine County, but then it did run through towns.
So wouldn't it also, if you're considering designation, involve public hearings and weigh-in by property owners who would be impacted?
It did. Absolutely, it did.
And
They had
considering, and if there was a group, I mean, that would be, it wouldn't just be like the county's like, oh, all right, we're just going to designate it.
No, there were several hearings. Absolutely, there were. But what happened, Fawn, is that even though people got up and spoke, they didn't realize what the attachments were that were going to come with it until after the fact. And so a lot of people, when you hear we're going to get this wonderful scenic highway, I'm all for it. I think it's wonderful too. But then whenever you see the impacts of accepting federal and state dollars and what happens at that point, that changes everything. And you don't realize those impacts until you've already gone into and signed the dotted line.
So I'm just curious, so how does that work? Is there an overlay? You know, if you're in that, if you want to build a building, is there an overlay that triggers the county's review? Or I don't understand how that plays out. That there's different
Yeah,
design standards?
twofold is there would be design standards that say that, you know, within the scenic highway, here are the standards for ministerial type development. And I think things like signs, overhead power, those kinds of things are, you know, regulated for ministerial type of activities. The discretionary activity, we would look at it, you know, using more judgment of, you know, how does this fit in with the protection of the scenic value of that stretch of highway?
So are there guidelines? Are there
There-
like guidelines for
Yes.
how you protect the scenic?
Yes, there are.
Okay.
There definitely are, and the other thing is too, is that there were certain improvements that had to be done. When you accept those grant funds, you're looking at some matching dollars on some of those issues.
So
And if you don't have those matching dollars, then you're not meeting the needs of the grant that you've accepted.
So is
There's-
there always a grant? I don't know, is there money attached to this?
Usually there's money attached, and that's what gets people to go in. It's, you know,
Yeah, there are
so-
grant programs that are available, and they're probably, they're competitive, you have to apply for
You
them.
don't automatically just get money. You're
Not that I'm
saying
aware
it
of.
makes you eligible
Right.
to compete for federal funding.
We got over, what did we get, $1 million on the federal scenic byway designation of Highway 4, was it?
I don't know.
350,000 of it was spent on a bathroom. Hello? I could think of a lot better use of funds. But there's attachments that come along with it. So you know, if somebody wants to look at that on an individual basis, I say you go for it and you study it and you have your hearings. But as far as having in my general plan that I want to encourage it, I don't. That's just me.
Now, it looks to me like this is a two-step process. First, you have to designate the local scenic roadway and corridor, establish criteria for designating others, and apply for state scenic highway designation for applicable sections of state roads 4 and 49, whatever those may be, in addition to what we have. Then you have to adopt standards for new development to maintain and enhance the view shed from all of these places. But what that does is, you know, lucky landowner that's along one of those. Congratulations, you have preserved a view shed. Now guess what? You get to keep it forever. And we ain't gonna pay for it. I am against 4B and 4C.
So don't we already have standards then, since we already have a scenic byway?
There are standards for, it's on the Ebbets Pass Scenic Byway Plan, and there are standards that were adopted.
But that's specifically for that area?
That's specific for that
Okay.
area.
I have the same comment about view sheds in my notes. Who decides what the view shed is and what happens to the person who's, as Kelly puts it, unlucky enough to own one?
You get it, whether you want it or not. I can testify to this.
And you're not compensated, and you
No.
just did everybody a big favor.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and every landowner in between gets to pay the lucky price. They're not bad. I mean, there's certain areas that I think these are wonderful things. The only problem is that you can't remove a certain area, you're either taking it one and all, or you're stuck with it. So,
But
So there are criteria that the state establishes for designating state scenic highways, and to a degree, Commissioner Merides is right that, you know, there are lengths of highways, and if there are communities within that, but there's also, and I don't know what that minimum distance is, that you say, okay, between Angels Camp and San Andreas could be designated a scenic highway. And once you hit the community, the urbanized area of the town, then that's not scenic. But I think to some degree, the state wants to see, you know, a longer linear stretch, you know, not sort of broken up into small pieces. So I don't know how that would fit the state's criteria. I just know my limited experience with that before was that they, you know, gets to the point where it's too segmented to say, no, it doesn't meet our criteria,
Right.
it's not going to work.
well, and then the state has oversight, and they get to say,
Yeah.
you
And
know, you're
also,
in that
if it doesn't
designated area,
currently
they have
meet,
say-so.
you know, sort of the visual standard, this doesn't qualify, this doesn't meet our qualifications. So there's a lot that goes into that designation, and, you know, you're right, there are restrictions that go along with it.
when the subject came up earlier this morning, the advantage, or one of the advantages that was expressed was that you get to have yourself on a map, and people who do take scenic drives look at these maps and they say, oh, we haven't been on that one, honey, let's go on that one, and then they do that. Okay, I get that. It's not how I take a drive, but it's different strokes, that's fine. But the implications for the people on the ground in our county are pretty severe, and it seems like the unintended consequences, but foreseeable consequences, are also pretty severe. So,
So
as a goal to increase that in the county,
I can tell you that where it is on Highway 4 going up the corridor through over in Ebbets Pass and into Alpine County, most of that is state and federal land. So the designation is proper in that place, and it is a draw to the economy. So that's why I bounce back and forth, because the line kind of came too far through a couple of towns that it does have an effect on. But when it's going through areas that are state and federal land and we're getting those designations, I think it's very beneficial to our county. It's just, it does have implications on small landowners.
and that designation that you're talking about wasn't made pursuant to a goal in the county plan to get that done, correct? That was the state or the federal government saying, we think that should be scenic, and they bounced it around between them?
I believe that there was a group of people in our district that wanted to get that designation, and they battled and fought for it, and I wrote letters against it, and so did many other people, but it was still approved. I mean, and I say that is a good scenic route. I'm not opposed to that being a good designation. I think it is, except for it did have impacts on the people after the fact.
Because it went a mile too far, a couple miles too far?
In many of the hearings and discussions that came up, people were told one thing and then we got another. And that's the problem, is that if you aren't looking at all those fine lines before it gets signed into effect, that's where it comes back and bites. And you're going to hear the side of the story that's pretty and rosy from the people that want it. And it sounds good, so you sell it to the public all pretty and rosy, and you get it, and then all of a sudden you get the impacts with it. It was a lesson learned. It was a very valuable lesson learned. But we did get improvements out of that money, too.
But having done that, we've sort of run out of highways that go through public lands to get designated scenic. Now we're talking about
Yes.
private people that own these
A
lands
couple of
along
years
these.
ago, they were looking at doing Highway 49. There was a big push on Highway 49. The state was wanting to do some scenic stuff there across Highway 49. I mean,
So now the effect that you talked about, where the designation may have gone a mile or too far, now if we do a new designation, it's all in that category of property.
that's my opinion.
Well, I'm hearing some consensus here. Ted, if you want to weigh in on this?
Well, the fact that I've been around long enough to know if you do business with the federal government, you're gonna lose. No matter how shiny it sounds, you're gonna lose. And so once they get their way on a piece of property, that property isn't worthless, but it's not worth what it would be otherwise.
There isn't anything in here that says if some offer comes up that's wonderful for our county, we can't look at it, review it, have hearings on it. I'm just saying, I don't want to promote it. That's all.
Yeah, I got that.
You got that?
I got that. So, I mean,
Well,
I,
I think that's the best way to put it. This can be done if it's really stands out as being a need somewhere.
Yeah, it can be done.
okay, so what I'm hearing is to eliminate 4B and 4C, right?
Yeah, now, so how does that affect the policies?
I don't think it does.
Okay?
I mean, obviously, we won't cross-reference the
Implementation.
implementation measure that's no longer there, but
Because this talks about existing ones.
4.3, we removed 4.3 already. Okay.
Okay, so shall we move on?
There's no effect, are we agreeing there's no effect? No policy changes by virtue of those being absent?
No.
I don't think so.
That's correct.
Okay.
Hillside and hilltop construction guidelines, which supports the new policy of proposed new development shall consider the scenic qualities of the natural resources in the design of the project.
Let's go back.
That was the one we deleted at 4.3.
And that's the new 4.3. Again, is proposed new development shall consider the scenic qualities of the natural resources in the design of the project.
I gave my paper to Colleen.
Well, if I understand it, these are guidelines, not mandatory restrictions.
Guidelines, they're guidelines.
It's not an ordinance. We're
Right.
not saying you have to do this in an
Right.
ordinance.
It's like Peter had said, it's like the McCollum Hill Design Review Guidelines. They're guidelines.
It's kind of a little helpful thing for developers.
I think so.
So are we good with it?
Hang on a second. Does, what we previously agreed on was the new policy statement that we extracted from the 96 plan and 3 implementation measures that supported it. 4D, COS 4D supports what was 4.3. Are we saying leave 4D in and the 3 that came, that tagged along from the 96 plan?
No.
Or does 4D do it instead of these 3?
Just 4D instead of the 3, because as Peter had said before, these implementation measures are more policies. That There's really no action. And the action here
Okay,
for the
gotcha.
implementation is the guidelines.
Okay, so our new 4.3 is over here, is from the old plan.
Right?
And 4D is now is the only implementation measure that supports it, is that right?
That's correct.
Not
So
A
far.
and C?
Well, 4A might support it.
Well, yeah, we have 2 left, 4A and 4D. You just get rid of B and C.
Oh, I'm sorry, A. Okay, right.
So are we good with that?
I am.
Yep.
Yes.
All right, shall we hear from the public on?
Oh, excuse me, I have a question about why a portion of that was cut. Reduced standards for, oh, I know why I had that question. Deleted was the language, reduced standards for bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Okay, elsewhere, I think it's in the, I think it's in land use, I can't remember, talks about encouraging facilities for those 2 things. What I took, considering the language still there and not deleted, I took it to mean that if you've got a piece of property that has special grading considerations and whatnot that this speaks to, if you've got to kind of go the extra mile because of this particular piece of property, your requirements, if you want to call them that, for bicycle and pedestrian amenities are reduced. You've got this other problem, that's enough for you to solve. We're going to let you off the hook over here. That's how I took that language to mean, and so I thought it was useful in that sense. So why was it deleted then?
I suggested deleting it because it just seemed much more specific than necessary for this kind of guidance. We have alternative road construction techniques, and road construction would include, multimodal types of transportation,
Well, I
including
didn't-
bicycles and sidewalks and those kinds of things.
As far as specificity goes, I don't think it's any more specific than the rest of this,
The only thing
Implementation
is,
measure.
David, the word reduced was the one issue that I would have had if it stayed in, because you've got state guidelines that tell you when you're doing bicycle lanes, how thick that paving has to be, this, that, and the other, and how do you reduce guidelines that are sent down from the state?
well, okay,
Am I-
that becomes a question as to what extent does the state require those kinds of amenities? And can we not, in a situation where, for example, we are encouraging a person to do some clustering, and that's going to, create some issues for them, but they do it anyway. Is there a trade-off here? Do they get some consideration for the requirements that we are placing on them to protect the landscape and protect the topography and do all these other things? I saw that as a nice little trade-off that they might get for these other efforts that they have to undergo.
But it could be that there's lots of little trade-offs for other requirements, and so I think what Peter's getting at is why the specificity here?
Exactly, yeah. And I guess the other reason, I think it then conflicts with policies in the circulation element that says we're trying to encourage.
Right.
Now, it may be that that particular design, location is inappropriate for, say, a bike trail because it's too steep. So we wouldn't incorporate it in there, but I think to specifically single that out as something we're going to reduce the standards for,
I agree.
that it seemed to conflict with the circulation element provisions, which we'll hopefully
Okay.
get to next time.
And it doesn't disallow it,
Yeah.
any reductions
We're-
or modifications. Because as Peter said, it would be included in the construction techniques for roads circulation.
Okay, maybe the reduced part is the problem for people. I can understand that. But how about the language, instead of the part that's been deleted, where appropriate, adjust standards for bicycle and pedestrian facilities, which blank looks.
I think it reads fine the way it is. I mean, because why don't we have equestrians or something in there, or?
Because those aren't requirements that are otherwise placed on developments in the general plan.
I guess my point is that it does call for, a degree of specificity. I don't think is required here,
Okay.
personally.
I'm all for not making specificity where it's not required, but I thought that was a nice marriage to what this measure seeks to do.
Yeah, I think that with the potential conflict with the circulation element would,
Maybe it was in circulation, I
It
don't
was
know.
circulation.
Okay.
Yeah.
that I would propose we leave the deletion out.
If I'm the lone reed in the wind,
I'm with you.
I'm out.
Okay. All right, so with that, we'll open up the public hearing and we'll talk about scenic resources and in addition, the open
General.
space zoning, the general, which is the open space zoning district. Anyone? Don't feel like you have to, but we welcome it. This is your window.
Vicki Reinke. On that open space zoning district, I would have to reread what ended up happening with it, but just, it sounded like you made it a better policy, because my notes were, how does this affect landowners? And did you feel that that got changed so that the landowner, they just weren't arbitrarily going to be setting these open space zoning districts? That got settled, is that correct? Am I saying that? Okay. And then on the highway, scenic highways, I see this as also the wild and scenic river designations that the state and federal put on rivers if you choose to. And it sounds wonderful on the outside, but when you dig deeper, as you explained, Lisa, there's always something attached that hurts the local people and the local property owners. So I'm glad you said you want to get rid of that. You know, if the state and the federal really wanted just to give us a designation of a beautiful highway, then do that. And that's it. It's just that you have this highway that has a sign that says scenic highway, but then they attach so many things to it that it isn't worth having. So I appreciate that you recognize that and have decided to remove that. We need to be very cautious, and I liked Ted's explanation. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Bob Garamendi. I'm here representing the Ag Coalition. I'm personally not quite sure what happened to the open space zoning district. First of all, is that an overlay? Is it meant to be an overlay?
I don't believe so. It's its own zone.
Yes.
Okay. As I was listening to the discussion, there was quite a bit made of resource production lands and clustering. It was the intent of the Ag Coalition and our recommendations that clustering was to be encouraged on resource production lands where and when appropriate. And if that were to occur, the remainder, as I understood it, or we proposed, remains in resource production lands. And you were saying, Peter, that would be where a open space zoning would occur or could occur?
It could, yes. And again, it depends on what the intent of that open space is for. If it was for retention of resource production, then maybe the open space zone itself would not be the most appropriate zone for that.
Right.
If it were intended for habitat preservation or recreation, then the open space probably, so you'd have to look at each one sort of on a case-by-case basis where it's appropriate.
How would that process be made as far as that determination?
We would look at it at the time that the project is going through and determine what would be the most appropriate zone for that project. So if you have existing resource production land, I'm just sort of thinking off the top of my head because, this hasn't all been, okay, what's the actual language of the zone going to say? That's something we need to do still. But that if it's resource production, the purpose of clustering would be to continue and encourage the productive use of that property for agricultural purposes. Probably the retention of whatever the ag zone for that property would be most appropriate to keep it that way. If it were set aside for some other purpose, then the open space zone is probably more appropriate.
As we have discussed in the past, there is concern about placing an open space zone on top of resource production
Right.
land for what it might be
And that's
perceived.
not the intent of this at all. That's not what I foresee how this would be used.
Well, it may not be the intent, and I hope the language is such that it can't be assumed as such.
So it's the way the language is written right now is a means to identify lands which have been dedicated to open space purposes. To me, that's...
And we've had this discussion as to resource production land could be classified as that.
If it were dedicated to open space, but if it's still in resource production,
I agree, and there's some question. And I just want to point out that we would be concerned about placing an open space designation on top of resource production land.
well, something that would limit your ability to do resource production,
Well, but
right?
Yes.
the problem that you seem to have, and I think it's well taken, is where does this intent concept come into it? If you're taking land, if you're clustering to preserve resource production lands, the goal, there's only one intent, and that's to preserve the resource production land. So this part that you've preserved should be forever in resource production and not redesignated for some other purpose that takes away the production value of the land.
Yes, generally that is correct, and that would be our concern, that the idea, and is if we cluster, is to encourage the conservation
Of the rest of
the
it.
resource production land that remains, without inhibiting the potential of that resource production land from what is permitted.
So then question for Peter then, what role, how do you determine intent for the clustering? How does that come into play?
Well, and maybe the language that was struck, some of that can go back in, for the purpose of managing unique, important, or significant natural or cultural resources. So we're saying this is going to be limited to that purpose, rather than, and the problem, and I see where Bob's getting at, is the state defines, through the government code, farmland, lands in timber preserve and land in Williamson Act as open space. And we define that on that map as a component of our open space. It's not public open space, it's not recreation, but it's open space. And that, we've had that discussion, and I tried to clarify where the type of open space that's identified in one color there is the productive lands type of open space. That's ranch land, it's vineyards, it's productive open space. But it's still open space in the way it's defined by the state. It's not open space in the way that some people consider my ability to go recreate on. It's not the national forest, it's not a state park. So there's different types of open space out there.
I see his concerns, and I think they're valid, and how easily that a developer could be doing clustering here to preserve this as resource and still being able to use the land, but it's going to stay open. I could see how easily that could get categorized and dumped into the open space mapping area. When we are working on the zones that we're talking about, and you had mentioned, zones 1 through 2, 3, kind of designating what that open space is for, whether it's recreation or something else, can you work on a zone that is for resource production land open space, so that it has its own open.
We could certainly do that, and that's all going to be part of a public review process as we come up with that
But then it makes it very
code.
clear that that resource production land is intended to continue to be a resource open space land, not that it's being pulled out completely to open space.
The residential development component is gone, but all the rest is still there.
Right, right. Would that,
Well,
no?
Open space, as Peter described, in state statute, it's defined. And resource production land under that definition would be considered open space. And what we're talking about, and the concern is that the way that it was used earlier about if that landowner wanted to, say he had the ability to put 4 parcels along the highway where there's water or power, then the remainder of that land would somehow get a designation of open space, which I don't think is necessary, for one thing, or it can be misconstrued down the road. I mean, earlier you're talking about, 20, 30 years down the road, it's an open space. Well, it can become very restrictive. And that would be the concern, is that there's a zone that's placed on there that's inappropriate for the land use designation. I'm not saying that the landowner themselves couldn't initiate some type of process, but to make that land use change just because there was a clustering, which we're trying to encourage, and then all of a sudden have an open space, I just think it could become problematic because of the nature of the land use designation and the definition of the zone itself.
But you're getting incentives for doing the clustering over here. You're getting some sort of incentive for keeping that open space on the other side. So
You're getting an incentive for keeping it open? You mean
Okay.
by,
So when you're agreeing to an open space area, we talked about this earlier, you're going to get an incentive over here and you can build more houses than what you had wanted right?
that's-
By
that's-
preserving the other
Well,
space.
smaller parcels.
Right, so you could do smaller parcels. If you're in that situation, and then we don't give a special zone for your resource over here,
If you don't want to give that special consideration,
Oh,
that is fine.
no, 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 no,
You
no,
know, what
no.
we're trying to do is encourage the use of clustering. Instead of putting 5 40-acre parcels out there, you put 5 parcels of 5 acres or 2 acres. And to us, that is a good land use tool, planning tool. And that could be put to use. There should be an incentive. It shouldn't cost that landowner anything to do that. That should be an incentive saying, okay, and then you have your remainder, whatever that may be, in resource production. Granted, all the density had been used up in that clustering. Any further thing you do with that property would require a general plan amendment.
What I'm trying to do, Bob, is make sure that we have protected that space that you're talking about, and that it doesn't fall into the wrong category here with
Well,
what we're
the
working
resource
on.
production, in our opinion, would be the proper category. It's what it was, and it's what it will remain. What we're saying is that clustering, and it seems it gets tossed around, is something that would benefit, in our opinion, if it's the right place to put it, and it has the right infrastructure in place to make it so it doesn't impact the rest. Boy, go for it.
So, Bob, I have a question. So are you?
Oh, there you are.
I'm here. No, I'm still here. It's something you just said. So if you put your 5 houses on 5-acre parcels and you have this large remainder that you have given up any development rights basically on,
You've
right?
utilized them.
Okay, you've utilized them, you haven't given up, you've used them, but you put them over here. Are you of the notion that then that other, let's say it's 100 acres, could be subject to new development with a general plan amendment? Or,
That is what I said, yes.
see, I've been under the impression that once you've utilized those rights, basically, the future subdividing or development on that, there would be no.
Well, it's probably
general plan.
unlikely, but it's possible that someone could come in and say, you know, I subdivided this, or my grandfather subdivided it decades ago, and it's really appropriate now because of any number of reasons that we didn't anticipate 20 years ago. And it's designated resource production, but it's really much more appropriate for some other use.
Because of the city grew that direction or did something.
Any number of reasons. And so the process would be to apply for a general plan amendment, which would increase the overall density for the entirety of the area, including the original, you know, the 5-acre parcels that were created as well as the rest of it. Typically, once, you know, some development is done, that development is sort of in place. And we would have to, you know, seriously consider it through a general plan amendment process, which is the highest level of discretion the county has in saying, that's a good idea, or no, it's not a good idea. And that can be done at any time.
And within what we've done, or what has been done, there's criteria and incentives, there's things to be considered before that process. And I might as well bring it up now. There was a recent letter that went out, I think, to the commission that said, no, that land should be put under a conservation easement held in perpetuity. That is not what we have proposed, nor do I think that would further that as an incentive for that landowner to do. Matter of fact,
It's
you
a
would not
disincentive.
have
Yeah.
that used as a land planning tool then. There may be some very specific situations where it would be, but no, we feel a general plan amendment would be required and necessary, along with all the other criteria that is in place there. And it's not like I'd come in and say, I'm going to change, I want another 5 parcels out here.
Yeah, and
So-
you know,
so
like
the
a year
other-
later, it's like, ooh, got
I mean,
another
there-
clustering.
But we are not proposing to place that property under any kind of restrictions in perpetuity unless that landowner wishes to do so.
So remember that the resource production designation is a land use designation. The open space zone is a zone. And so the resource production designation in this case would stay the same. the open space designation or the open space zoning would, sort of fit within that. And I think as we craft the actual zone, we could have different criteria, as Lisa suggested, that here's the open space for agricultural purposes, here's open space for, and we have different criteria established within the zone. And we have to work out the details of it. If there's a concern that somehow this open space zone would somehow restrict the ability for agriculture to continue to be productive, we could refine this to sort of focus it more on more natural resource protection or sort of the language that was in here before.
Elsewhere in here, we are paying special attention to prime, Bob, you might want to hang around here for a second. We are paying special attention to prime agricultural land. Okay, so you've done a clustering and you've preserved prime agricultural land, whatever it is, whatever's growing there, you want to keep it growing there, as opposed to a piece of land it might be resource production, but it's not all that productive because of various reasons, soils, hillsides, and whatever. And so the open space designation, zone, might apply so that you can do something else with it other than resource production, but it is still nevertheless open space. Is that the purpose of open space zoning, so that it's one other thing that you can do with a piece of property that remains open space but isn't ag production?
I really wasn't thinking along those lines so much as if the purpose of setting aside that open space was for some other purpose than ranching or farming, then that would be the parameters of that zone would be established for that purpose. If the purpose of setting aside that was for clustering, so that, and someone has several hundred acres and they want to do 5.5s instead of 5.40s, the way that our ordinance would be written is they could come in and they could do that. And they'd have to go through the parcel map process, and we'd have to look at the impacts of that, but it still wouldn't be something that we would craft our code to allow that as sort of a normal procedure. And then it's up to the landowner to design what areas they want to keep in production and what areas they want to subdivide for family purposes, for financial, for whatever reason someone wants to subdivide it. And it could be that it's the most productive land, or it could be this area is just the best for carving up those parcels. It's, as Bob suggested, it's close to where power and water and the roads are, rather than building long roads back into the property, which are going to be very costly. Put it all up front, minimize the development costs, and keep the rest in agriculture. And it may be, I won't say marginal, but it may not be prime. It's good grazing land, but it's not going to be good for orchards or something like that. It doesn't really matter. It's really up to the property owner to determine what's going to best suit his needs within the parameters that the county's established for its own.
I think in answering Bob's question, I hope I got this right. Whether they designate it for open space for whatever the project may be, they're not going to lose their resource production zoning. It's just going to have a zone.
The resource production designation will stay.
Designation is going to say it's
Yeah.
still resource production open space.
Yes, and if you've
then
got
it was
open space
agricultural-
within agricultural land, then you can still do ag on it. I think that's the way we'd have to craft the ordinance to allow that.
Okay.
We're not really there yet. All we're saying is, does it make sense for us to create a zone within our zoning code of open space?
It does, because open space can be our parks, it can be agricultural, it can be the resource production, it can be any of those things. So I think having the zones is a good idea, so we've identified what those open spaces were saved for. And it doesn't affect their resource production.
And we'll have to get into the nitty-gritty when we create that zone, when we actually amend the code to create that.
You'll do a good job.
Try, if we ever get to it.
All right, so we're still in public comment period on the open space zoning district and scenic resources. Anyone
They don't
else?
want the open space on top of that. Is that what this is about?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to clarify what you just said, I think, was that, I understand that the open space zone, the purpose is you do want the any residential component gone?
Where the density has been utilized elsewhere, you would
Right.
identify that that density is,
The density's gone, so, we wouldn't put that zoning on there until that had been already decided.
that would be part of the overall project approval.
Through the project approval,
Yeah.
right. So that is the purpose of the zone dedicated for open space
Right.
use. Okay. But that wouldn't disallow any resource production use?
No,
Okay.
not the, yeah. no.
Hello, Tanya Dawson from Valley Springs, District 1. And I have a question. We have an option of not having an open space zone? That's an option?
This is a proposal that's with part of the general plan right now, that we would create one. We don't have one now, and if this commission decides that, no, that's not a good idea, then it wouldn't be included as part of the general plan.
Well, then I would like to recommend not having an open space zone. I think the fewer regulations, the better, and the fewer controls and telling people what to do with their property and how to do it and when and where to do it. I think the less regulations, the better. Let people decide for themselves. It's their property, they've worked hard for it, and it should be their decision how to do that. And I think open space zoning could probably come with a whole lot of strings attached from the state level and possibly the national level. And I would prefer to see a general plan with no open space zoning. Thank you.
So, Tanya, just to clarify something real quick, they're not going to lose their zoning, whatever that property zoning is would stay the same. We're just, when they go through a project and they're voluntarily giving that land for open space through their project, for however they've got their project forward, there's going to be just a zone that would specify that that was open space on top of their zoning. So they're not being forced into doing this. Nobody's saying we're giving them that zoning. It's a zone number that we would put over the top of their current zoning. Can you help me explain that one?
I'm not sure, you got a lot of zoning in there.
Right?
And their general plan land use
Well,
designation.
I think we have to address the specifics of whether it's an overlay zone or it's a separate standalone zone, but the purpose of it would be to identify lands that have been dedicated to an open space purpose.
And it actually provides property owners a little more flexibility.
Yeah, we're not putting any on top of somebody saying you have to put this into that open space.
But then in order to do a project or something, would they be encouraged to put something in open space? Would it be like a trade-off that, to encourage them to put their property in open space if they want to do development or something?
I think the only time that happens, Peter, and you might be a better person to answer that, is if they're wanting to make their project bigger than it really should be, and they're going to downsize the lot sizes to get more clustering in, then they would be making incentives to do that, but
To the degree that other policies encourage clustering, yes, they would be encouraged to do so. Not because of the open space, but because of the other reasons why we've, in the land use element and elsewhere, we are encouraging clustering as a way to reduce costs, we reduce impacts on the community, on natural resources. So yes, we're encouraging clustering.
Yeah,
And so when someone comes in for a project, we would be looking at the various policies that say, gee, we want to protect cultural resources, we want to protect water quality, you can't build in a flood zone, all the various reasons why, these areas shouldn't be developed, and here's the area that should be developed. So you've got 100 acres, you take that whole density and you move it all into that area that's appropriate for development. That's part of the whole design process, and you look at any, really new project, that's what you see out there for most new development. The developers themselves design it that way because they also know they can reduce costs because of the reduction in infrastructure costs.
Also, too, as a citizen of Calaveras County, I'm not in favor of clustering or encouraging clustering. I'm just not into that. I grew up on 600 acres in Santa Cruz, and I like the wide open spaces to be able to do what I like. And I got out of Santa Cruz because they got just way too controlling over everybody's land use and over everybody's decision, what they can and can't do on their own property. And I got out of Santa Clara County for the same reason. And I would just like to see less regulation, not more. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I assume, of course, that if we do create a open space zone, that would be one of those things that would be open to the Williamson Act? If somebody got that, that 100-acre piece that was left over from their clustering, and they eventually want to do something with it, whatever they had.
Yeah, something that's zoned open space could be in Williamson Act,
Yeah.
whether it's resource production or some other open space. The Williamson Act, is used primarily for agricultural production, but there's also provisions under the state law that allows it for just open space.
But what I was thinking was, if someone had that big piece left over, and if he has to commit to what it's to be open space saved for, and then he decides, okay, now it's time, then he has to go through, what, like 10 years to get it out of,
Well, that's only if it's under contract. It doesn't, there's no requirement that it be in the Williamson Act contract.
yeah. But I mean, it's open to that.
It's open to that, yes. It could be if the landowner wanted it to be, and it met the qualifications for it.
I'm Peter Reyes from General. Not that I don't trust the government, but you know what? I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. I'm going to give you incentive. We encourage you. But unless you see a black and white, what's the encouragement and incentive is? Because all you good folks, 5 years from now, who knows where you're going to be? And there's going to be a little interpretation one way or another. I know nothing about farming, but if that gentleman wants to, one house on 50 acres, bless his heart, let him do it. If there's a demand there, I think that gentleman behind me has got enough brains that, hey, development would be nice. And folks, encouragement by the government. I don't trust them. I had some experience with local government and here in different counties. I don't like the idea of encouragement. What the hell do you got to offer as an encouragement? Send him a birthday card, a Valentine card, or at the expense of the taxpayers, encouragement one way or another? I don't think these folks need to defend it, okay? They got enough brains. They survived with all the negative against their farming and so on. I think they got integrity and honesty and hard work. I think they can, make decisions. They're over 18. What is best for him and his family, and his neighbors, and so on. So, I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. You know what? Sure. And I'm going to sell you some snake oil, too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Garibaldi, property owner on Highway 26. I tell you, these three people are hard to follow. I don't know what to say here, but I'm between this gal and Bob the Ag Man. And I think that us property owners should make our own decisions. You should put in place that we can or do these things, which I think would be very beneficial. The only problem is, talk is cheap. I was looking into a subdivision before I got burned out, and man, it is expensive to subdivide. And even a cluster zone is expensive. And what is the state water deal? They're shutting us down on the water and everything. I mean, and put ag in on the leftover land. that's expensive to do. I mean, everything is very expensive, but it would really benefit this county if the ag would come in and help out, especially in the Butte Fire area, where it's going to be dormant for a long time, and there won't be any production. I think agriculture would be the answer to a lot of our problems on this burnt land, because, I mean, yeah, you can plant trees, but you know, it takes 50, 60 years before a crop of trees come back, where ag could get in right away pretty much in 1 or 2, 3 years. Whatever crop you want to put in, you're going to have a production, and you're going to make some money, and you're going to help the tax situation for the county. And I think it'd be very beneficial. The ag is probably just one part of the puzzle, but it is a very good puzzle part. And another thing I wanted to say about the state on the highway deal. You know, we got a 2 mile of a snake road right over there on 26. And I've been trying to get the state to lower the speed limit to 35 in there, because a lot of cars have been running off the highway. And not only for that benefit, which is very important, but also the sight distance of putting a new driveway in. They require 500 or 600 feet either way. And in that stretch, I mean, the old driveways, they're lucky to have 100 or 200 feet. I mean, it's pretty dangerous, you know, with that 55-mile-an-hour speed limit through there. I don't know whether the county can help with that or not, but I figured I'd just throw that in. But it's, as far as this cluster zoning, I think it's a pretty good idea, as long as the property owner will go along with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Lou Mayhew. I guess I'm becoming confused about clustering, and I think there may be a mile or two yet to go down the road on this. But I assumed that when you give up density rights to a large parcel and you use them up in one corner, that density rights are gone for that large parcel. And I guess I'm a little concerned that somebody could then come in and ask for a general plan amendment and essentially gain back density rights for the remainder parcel based on the land use designations and zoning. And I think that has some difficulty with it, that the people who purchased the homes on the smaller acreage, there's not much protecting them from what they bought into. And in a way, it can be a kind of way of piecemealing a development. Just by using the process of land use designation adjustment, which you can request 4 times a year. Those may be considered. Now, there may be some protections in there someplace, or the guidelines for clustering may develop those. I don't know. But it seems to me there has to be something more than simply the ability to come back, request a land use designation change, and gain back the density. I think it defeats the purpose, and I don't think that's good for certainly the people who purchased. I think clustering and that whole concept has great marketing value in terms of real estate development, but it's got to have some protections, or it can become a kind of, not quite bait and switch. There are criteria, but nonetheless. So I don't know when that conversation gets conducted or decided or embellished, but again, I was a little surprised to hear the intent on that. I think on the open space district, I think it can be useful, and I guess I'm certainly comfortable with that as long as the criteria that you have listed in that remain in that. So as it's written, I think it's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I answer that? Can we have this part of that discussion now?
Come on up, Bob.
I just think it's...
Wait,
Excuse
till
me.
you get to the microphone.
Bob Garamendi, I appreciate that. We do need to have the discussion and the reality. When the Ag Coalition, we submitted a draft element. That draft element has been cut up and changed in Word, and it's happening here today as well. To answer that question, the bait and switch, I take offense to. What we had proposed, and what is still somewhere on the table, I believe, is that when you do that clustering, that land use designation remains resource production. What we had proposed is that any further development of that would require a general plan amendment. Plus, with that general plan amendment, it would have to be, the designation would have to be changed. And if there's a land use designation that's changed from resource production to some other use, then you get into the easements, the perpetuity. We had Appendix A and Appendix B, and that is where that begins to be addressed, is when that landowner decides, okay, I'm going to do that. You have to get a general plan amendment, and if you're in the Williamson Act, it's going to require a 10-year withdrawal time to even, I mean, you have to be planning out quite a ways. But that second time around would require a general plan amendment and a land use designation change. And with that, what we had proposed is that at that point in time, you begin to lock things up in perpetuity. And if that ends up being the case or not with this, but that is what we had proposed. And I just want to make it clear that we aren't bait and switching anything here. Things have been switched, but it wasn't by our doing. And I think it's important that what is being proposed and encouraged may not be the right word, but incentives, there's an incentive for that landowner to utilize the cluster, have the remainder, and if he wants to do something else with that, then there's a whole nother series of criteria he'd have to meet.
I would just say that, I mean, it is concerning to me about the original property owners, let's say the 5 people that bought in, to these 5 homes on smaller lots with, I think, at least the promise that they would be sitting there with, 100 acres all around them that would be able to be developed. It just, I am...
Who made that promise?
Well, when they purchased the property, right? When they bought their 5 acres and this the 5 homes, they could see that there was this consumption of development rights. To me, I mean, it's like, yeah, they consumed them all. That's why we're all here together in this little complex of 5 homes. And they've used them all up, so wow, that's like national forest land almost or something. It's like, it's not going to be developed. I mean, I guess my question is, how did they get the memo that, no, there could be further development down the road? And not only that, it's probably because of what you've just said, it's not going to be resource production anymore. It's going to be something else. And that something else could be, I don't know, commercial.
There's a whole process. If you look at Appendix A, there's a set of criteria.
But we don't have Appendix A anymore.
Yes, you do.
And
It's
it's
Appendix B.
Okay.
So what Bob is explaining is really no different
What
than
Bob's
any
trying to
other,
explain.
any other general plan amendment process. Right now, someone buys a piece of property and the land around it is designated rural residential, whatever it might be. That's what they expect to see. But at any time, a property owner can come in and apply for an amendment. And it's a discretionary review by the county, and the public gets involved in that discussion. And if the five people that bought those 5-acre parcels say, wait a second, here's why we bought this property, and it's totally inappropriate to be redesignating this land for resource production to something else. That's a decision that the county, that the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors makes as they would for any general plan amendment. It's just not sort of a routine, oh, I'll apply for a general plan amendment, I get it. They would have to look at, is it appropriate to change it?
So when
And my
they-
guess is if it were a fairly recent development that occurred, the answer is going to be no, it's not appropriate.
So
And
when
not
I-
o- there's criteria, unlike other lands. What we're recommending is that there's a set of criteria that are fairly stringent.
So
And
it doesn't.
it's not going to be easy to do.
Right.
But there may be circumstances in which it may be appropriate. And you can guess what, we can come up with any scenario, but
So what I'm thinking is like the future home buyer is like sort of privy to all of this, pre-planning that goes on and the creation of the new parcel map or subdivision or however the rights were used. But the reality is that they come in, they see a 5-acre parcel and they buy it. There's no sort of future tripping about or knowledge that, oh, by the way, in order for us to get these 5 homes on these 5-acre parcels, we had to give up our rights and, for this other, to allow this other 100 acres to remain resource production. Does that make sense? I'm just saying,
who gave up their rights?
No, that you've used your density, you've used the density.
And we agree, we do use our density.
No, I know.
Absolutely.
I think I'm just talking to myself out loud here, kind of, Bob. I'm just trying to go through this process about,
I think I can add a
yeah, I'm
perspective.
just saying,
But
I get,
I appreciate the discussion.
Yeah.
And I appreciate
Yeah.
it does need this
I'm just saying
conversation
I
needs to
get
be-
it. I mean, I get what you're saying, and, what Peter's is like, it could be anyone, it's like I come in after all of that work has been done, all I see is a 5-acre, a house on a 5-acre parcel.
What
That's
we-
all I
what-
really
what-
know.
What you've had the ag community do, and Mr. Garibaldi brought this up earlier, we're going from a lot of this land from 5 acres density to 40-acre density.
Yes.
So we are giving something up
Yes.
right off the get-go. And we aren't asking for anything.
No, I'm with you, Bob, I get it. I'm just,
So when you talk, when this conversation sort of comes down like there's something deserving here, we're trying to put in place a process that would, if there is development, to concentrate that development where it would be more appropriate.
right.
And
Right.
after the fires and that, it becomes much clearer. Having things spread out
Right.
becomes quite difficult.
Right. I think it was Mr. Mayhew's, it got me to thinking about, wow, yeah, was there a promise to those people? But there really wasn't, so,
Well, there wasn't,
right.
but
right.
if you look at and this is I think I complained about it once before, the way this is happening, we get lost. We deal with one thing 2 months ago, we forget about it.
Right.
We move on, but we don't deal with this yet, we're going to deal with it later, and you lose that.
Yeah.
And we're coming from it from a perspective that we're able to put together this element, and it all made sense to us.
Right.
Actually, until like 5 or 6 years later, then we forgot why we did it. But it did make sense at the time, and it makes some sense today. But to look at it piecemeal, I can understand why people feel the way they do.
Yeah.
But look at it as a total, and it paints a totally different picture.
Right. No, I get it. I'm glad we had this conversation, too.
Okay,
I'm
thank
glad
you.
we did too,
Yeah.
because I think that we're talking about open space and conservation. And they're not ever, from what I'm getting from him today, ever designating their property into open space and conservation. They're maintaining their resource production. And so that's why when we're sitting here talking about zones of open space, it isn't applying to him because
No.
they're not designating to open space. They're still maintaining their resource
Right.
production.
Right. But there could be someone else that wants to do recreation or habitat. conservation or something.
This doesn't even apply to them.
That's
If they're
right.
not designating their property to
Yes.
open space, this doesn't apply.
If they, yes, my understanding is, yes, you can do your clustering in a parcel that is designated resource production and redesignate the remaining open space as not resource production, but as open space for some other purpose, correct?
It could be done that way.
That's what they're not doing, though. That's
But that's-
not what he
yeah.
just explained, and I didn't.
I don't know.
This is, open space is not going to apply to what he's talking about, because when they're doing their little clustering here, they're still maintaining their resource production over here and not designating it as open space.
And I
Who are
think,
they?
well, part of
The
the,
ag people.
part of the,
Well,
Right? Am I right?
But there's,
part of
but
the,
there's non-ag people that own resource production land.
Really?
Yeah?
I know, I knew
Right.
that. I was kidding.
and part of this is it's where, we don't have the details, but I mean, conceptually, I think the idea of open space zoning is good, is to have the flexibility to have that available. Now, what it actually looks like, I mean, we need to get the defining details.
And we're not crossing that bridge today.
Right.
But the bait and switch, which is what Bob's trying to address, is, it's not a bait and switch. When you look at this land 50 years later, and now because of whatever has happened in the county, now it makes sense to do something, provided the property owner wants to do it, then you look at it again. The answer still might be no.
Right.
But it's not a bait and switch from those people who bought those.
Right,
Okay.
right.
And I would give you the example in Rancho. 2 or 3 years ago, might have been before your time, Peter, where the board adopted an ordinance allowing accessory dwellings in Rancho, where the accessory dwelling could be as large as 1,200 square feet. So that's actually the average
think that's
size home
state
in
law,
Rancho.
right?
Yeah.
State law,
State law.
right,
Okay.
allows accessory dwellings.
Right, but we had the option of saying no, right, as I recall. Otherwise, it wouldn't have come before the board.
No, we had to amend our ordinance to
Right.
allow that.
We had to
Unless,
write an
unless there are,
ordinance.
the only restrictions that the county or city could put on allowing
Lot
those would
size.
be if there were some type of infrastructure that prohibited, that, cause a health and safety hazard.
Well,
So,
the setbacks and the septic systems and whatnot that exist there.
so if they're inadequate sewage capability in an area, you could restrict those from that area. And that's, again, that was before I was here, so I don't know the specifics of what happened in Rancho.
Take the piece of land without the clustering. Instead of doing the clustering, you did 10 acres, okay? And 50 years from now, it makes sense to allow those people to subdivide. That's a very common occurrence, as populations grow. And so now those people can subdivide their 10 acres into, 4 2.5s. And some of them will do it and some of them won't. But it's a tool that's very commonly used. And that's really kind of what we're talking about here.
Okay, and Mr. Garibaldi, we usually get everyone a chance to speak,
I'm
but you're
sorry.
there, so let's,
I'm premature, I guess.
oh, okay. Was there anyone else who wanted to?
This has been a very enlightening discussion. I think we do need to go into a lot more detail later about a lot of these things. What we've always called these subdivisions with clustering on them is conservation subdivisions. At least that's how they were originally developed by the Randall Arendt, who developed conservation subdivisions, and it was a method of taking large property and saying, it would be most efficient to put it over here and to, keep the woods and keep the agriculture and keep the pond over here, and it would never be developed further. That was the idea behind it. That's why they call it a conservation subdivision. So the people buying those lots buy that with that understanding. So down the road here, when you're developing this idea, that needs to be talked about.
Yeah, I think we're still in the
Yeah, you're
gray
right.
area here.
Right.
Thank you.
God's preserving that view shed.
Just make it, really short, for those people that have already spoken.
Yeah, Lou Mayhew. I apologize, Bob, for using bait and switch. I think probably that attributes some motive.
It's a little
Yeah,
sneaky,
I
yeah.
think. But basically providing a means for a kind of piecemeal, step-by-step development that becomes unique out in the countryside. It just seems to me that you're going to have some additional criteria and guarantees, or get rid of clustering.
Yeah, I think
Don't
we're
encourage
working,
it.
we're going to be working on that.
So, thank you.
No, thank you.
My name's Jerry Howard. I live in Mountain Ranch, District 2. I've gotten really confused by this discussion versus the language that I understand is in the thing, in the plan, that the open space designation, the language that I see, and correct me if I'm wrong, is create an open space zoning district or equivalent as a tool for preserving and/or managing unique, important, or significant natural and cultural resources. And I don't know how we got into the morphing off into clustering and all of that under that current language. And is that still the language that
No,
we're working
Mr.
with?
Howard, it's not. Who's got the language?
Not me.
Create an open space zone or equivalent as a means to identify lands which have been dedicated to open space purposes.
Okay, and I still don't understand how that gets into the resource production, which was one of our concerns from the get-go, as Mr. Garamendi had discussed earlier. There's no mention of agricultural land or resource production land in that language, and I'm concerned about that and where this discussion has led to. Thank you.
Thank you.
When Bob got up and talked about it, that's how it went.
Hello, Tanya Dawson from
Very
Valley
short,
Springs.
Tanya.
Very short, just one. Again, I just want to say, I'm concerned about open space being redefined at the state or national level, which I think is a real possibility, that the feds could come down with what they decide, what they want to do with what we've decided is open space, or the state. And I'd like to see the general plan have just the bare minimum state requirements. I don't want us to volunteer to add any more restrictions and regulations than the state requires. And also, anything that the state requires that's oppressive, I'd like just a statement also to say that this is a state requirement and it doesn't necessarily reflect the wishes of the citizens of Calaveras County. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Okay. So rather than,
Am I allowed to talk now?
you please, just a minute. You've got a minute.
Just a minute, huh? Well, I was thinking about your concerns on whether the person would sell the property to a small parcel owner. And in real estate, there's a disclosure form that you have to sign that if the property owner wishes to do something on that open space, I think he would have to disclose it to, and I think that would probably answer your questions that you brought up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So our discussion, or is there any,
I have some.
okay?
I think I've gotten myself confused. And this is on the open space district. Okay, we have land designated resource production. What zoning goes along with that?
It would be AP,
AP, A1, GF, general forestry, there could be a number of different zones that, rural residential, or residential agriculture. think those would be appropriate zones
Okay,
within.
let's take an example. Let's assume that you have land zoned AP. It's in the Williamson Act. And you have one of these clustering episodes takes place. And,
It has to come out of Williamson in order to do that.
well, not all of it. Let's assume that he terminates his contract with respect to the part that he wants to put the buildings on,
Okay.
because he wants to keep the Williamson Act on the rest of it for obvious reasons. And so that goes through. Now, are we now saying that his zoning changes from AP automatically to open space?
No.
So it could stay AP?
Yes, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Okay.
right.
Maybe that answers Bob's issue, I don't know.
Can I follow up with Kelly's question as to what conditions would change it from AP to open space, and why?
I would think that that would occur when the purpose of the open space, and it gets sort of back to the original language,
Right.
unique or important natural resources or natural or cultural resources. So that was intended to, so when the development comes in and we've identified that there's a Indian village site, or there is tiger salamander habitat, whatever it might be, that's, you can't develop this. Let's show that as being open space, as a part of that open space area that's created for the subdivision, or a conservancy buys property for the purpose of protecting the natural resource.
Okay, wait. That change is made at the request of the property owner? Or that change is made as a condition of allowing the clustered development that created the space to begin with?
Right.
The second, not the first?
It could be either.
It could be either.
Yes.
But if the county said, okay, you're going to cluster this development, the land that you're leaving open is one of these sensitive categories, wildlife or cultural. So as a condition of allowing your cluster development, you're going to be required to rezone the remainder of the property open space for the preservation of the whatever it is. And therefore, the hurdle that somebody 50 years from now would have to cross to change that would be higher than it otherwise would have been.
Right, yes.
Okay, so it could be a requirement depending on what that open space is. Okay, but that's different than saying what the purpose of the clustered application was to begin with.
I think we get sidetracked on the whole clustering issue.
Maybe.
And again, the purpose was to identify land that was specifically set aside for the protection of that resource.
Okay.
And typically that is done through identifying open space within a project and clustering that's done. But that's not necessarily the only way that could be done.
Maybe we should change the language a little bit to make it clear it's just not any open space, because open space could be AP land, it could be timberland, it could be any kind of land.
So as Peter
Well, that's
suggested,
what it
looking
says
back
here.
at the original.
Unique.
Yeah, if we're going back to the original, I mean, I would keep open space for the purpose of
I would use the
preserving
language that you suggested, but just put that phrase at the end. Dedicated to open space purposes for managing unique, important, or significant natural and cultural resources. That narrows the focus, gets away from the resource production issue, and so it gets us back to the element itself, which is the conservation element.
It seems to me that the implications here are not as a tool at the discretion of the property owner. Yes, it could happen, but it's more likely a tool that the county uses to get something it wants, that is the preservation of this land because of something that's on it. Salamanders or whatever. Why else would that tool come into play?
Right,
Why
yes.
would the property owner specifically say, yeah, I want to give up this ag production land in favor of this? That would be crazy. It's really a tool to say, for the county to say, you get your clustering, you get your full count, density count over here in this corner, but the remainder is going to be designated open space for the preservation of one of these things on the list. Correct?
I suppose so, yes.
The property owner is otherwise not going to be able to do diddly with that piece of
That's
property
true.
because of those things on that piece of property.
Right.
Because of these special things. Even though it's zoned 20 acres or 5, 10, 20, 50, whatever it is. Right?
And so whenever that property owner says, I'd really like to unload this, and people come in and say, hey, I'd like to do a project on it. So, oh, well, we've got, this identifies that this is open space. Just, don't bother, if you really think there's a way that you can develop it and still protect that resource, give it a try. But it's been looked at, and it's been identified as the best use of that property is protecting that resource. And you've been able to transfer the density off it by developing somewhere else. And it eliminates confusion in the future.
For someone
buying that with
speculating with the hopes of.
But if you just had normal property that doesn't have anything particularly unique or important, significant, et cetera, and you went through that scenario, you just stay in the same zoning you were in. Is that right? Wouldn't be open space.
Just the way it works right now.
Right.
Just the way it works right now.
And there could be a unique circumstance where someone just, has identified land and they own it and they say, I want to keep this in open space. I love the critters and I want to make sure that whoever, gets this after I'm gone, that this is protected and I want to see it zoned open space. Now, probably what they do is do a conservation easement on top of that. But that's another tool that it could be used for.
The property owner could want to designate it open space so that the buyers of his lots have a little bit more assurance that if somebody ever wanted to change that open space, they do have a higher hurdle.
Right.
Enhancing the value of the parcels in question.
Yeah.
And providing those landowners, those neighboring property owners with some.
It's not his business to help the neighbors, but
No,
okay.
but still. So are we,
Well, could Peter read it one more time with his addition?
Create an open space zone or equivalent as a means to identify lands which have been dedicated to open space purposes for managing unique, important, or significant natural or cultural resources.
does that work?
Agriculture not being one of those.
Right.
Not in-
Right.
Does that work for you
Okay.
guys?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so we're good. Were there any other, based on public testimony, any revisions?
Hang
No?
on one second. Yeah, I wanted to address Tanya's concern that it's a restriction, and that's why we just had this discussion to talk about what's the implication of it. Under the various scenarios, depending on the condition of the property, but the way I see it, Tanya, is the explanation I just came up with was that a person could have a piece of property that, absent this provision, they might not be able to do anything with. And this gives them the opportunity to do something with it. There's conditions, but it's a pretty good trade-off. With respect to no, that was it. Your concern was the open space zone. And that's why I wanted to have this discussion personally, so that I understand it better as not a requirement, but a tool that a person can use to make something out of nothing, would otherwise be nothing. look, the clustering idea, we're not going to get away from. It's a tool that also allows a person to do something with a piece of property that they could not otherwise afford to do. Put development on a piece of property using the density that you had here and putting it here. If people want to live on that smaller piece of land, and they don't need 5, 10 acres, good for them. And it leaves the other land open. So that's a benefit to the property owner to be able to develop a piece of property to its previous density at a much lower cost and much more practical.
So was there a suggested revision? That's what I'm asking.
No, I'm trying to address public concerns and to let them know that's how I see it.
Okay. All right, very good. So we will be moving on to recreation resources. I think we'll take a short recess till 3:30, and we will be, I'd like to call the meeting back to order.
Okay, agreed.
So all right, so we are back in session, and we are talking about recreation resources. So page 21. So we've got a number of implementation measures. Any comments?
Just some implementation measures on, which one?
Recreation.
Page
Starting with
21, bottom of
5A?
page 21.
Yes.
I'm off there.
Oh, well, I'll start while people are looking for their notes. On 5A, my question is, Chapter 1624, which is cited here, what does that require of us?
That is the part of the subdivision ordinance.
The which
and-
ordinance?
Subdivision,
Yeah?
and that is where the county's implementation of the Quimby Act is located.
The Quimby Act again.
That's the parkland dedication requirements. And this basically reflects state law.
Right, okay.
So the revision is then to bring it into consistency with state law?
Yes. And to essentially establish the goal of 5 acres per 1,000 residents.
I don't like that state law.
You don't?
No. We changed the
What
state-
happens to us if we don't get the 3 acres?
Then we're,
Non-compliant?
well, we're not providing sufficient recreation area for our citizens.
So, to
I
me,
mean, we can establish a lower threshold. This is what the state allows.
well, if
we
we
can-
do, it's just going to come back and be corrected back to this, right? I guess my bigger concern, Peter, would be, we aren't putting in the recreation facilities, but yet we supposedly have a mitigation bank somewhere holding money, right?
Well, again, that's,
Assuming that we've been collecting money on subdivisions, which I don't know that we have or not, because I don't know what, I need to look into that further. But yes, the intent here would be that we would at least begin to collect money to establish recreation areas to serve new development.
or it's just the developer provides the
Or
recreation
the
area.
developer provides the
Right.
recreation if the project's large enough to
But we
support it.
haven't demanded that in the past, have we?
He doesn't know.
It's,
He's
the law's
here.
been there. What Peter's not sure about is if we've been collecting either the in lieu fees, and I don't think that there's been a subdivision in his tenure here that would show that they
Right.
provided the recreation, since we don't, you said the threshold was 50 units, or?
What does the standard, what does 1624 say now on acreage?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, this says revise it to reflect a minimum standard of 3, so presumably it's not 3 now, it's 2 or 1 or something.
It may not have a standard.
You might not have one. Okay.
So we changed a word earlier when we were working back here. Where was that reference number for? COS 5.1. Oh, it says in every community.
That wasn't
We
in this.
deleted that, and this doesn't have it, so it's good. Okay.
Are we good on 5A?
Well, just a second. There's this phrase, unless a higher standard not exceeding 5 acres per 1,000 residents can be demonstrated.
So the way the law is written, the state law is written, is that the maximum the county can require exact of a development is 3 acres per 1,000, unless the county, or unless that community, that district, already has, say, 4 acres, or whatever, something between 3 and 5. And so you can require that the new development match the provisions of parkland that's already in the community. So if Copperopolis had a recreation area and they had existing facilities of 4.5 acres per 1,000 people, that's what we could require of new development, to match that. So you retain the same level of parkland service for the new residents as existing residents, so that it doesn't diminish the availability of parkland for existing residences. The cap on that is 5 acres. So even if the county had 7 acres per 1,000 residents, the maximum you could require of a developer is 5 acres.
If we already know we don't have 5 acres per resident countywide, then isn't the language that Kelly pointed out kind of superfluous? If we already know that?
I don't know that we know, I don't know,
Oh, we haven't done a count, so to speak?
no. I mean, we may have done it at some point in time, but I haven't done a count since I've been here. I don't know what it is.
This language says, in effect, if we do an assessment, and I think that goes along with the recreational master plan idea, if we do an assessment and we find out that we are now at 4.5, we're not going to go back to 3, we're going to stay at
Right.
4.5 or 4.5 to 5.
Right.
So basically saying that new development is not going to diminish the ability,
The
the
parkland.
existing level of service that people in the community currently enjoy.
Well, that new development won't diminish the current level is one aspect of the implementation, but the implementation goes beyond that, because this says we want to achieve 3 acres minimum.
Right.
Unless we find out we're already over that, then we'll take the higher number.
Exactly.
But we've crossed out, we're going to be looking at and keeping a existing inventory, so.
Those are moved
Those
to
are
new,
their own implementation
own
measures.
measures. I felt those are separate. The note below says these are separate issues and were moved to separate
So they're
H and
important,
I.
they're just not combined with this one.
So this is language sent down to us from the state that we essentially need to adopt.
The Quimby Act is an enabling legislation that says the counties and cities can require this. We don't have to. We can say, we don't want recreation space for our communities, and you don't have to provide any for us. That's the maximum that we can require under state law. So if the recommendation is that a community has about 5 acres of active recreation area for every 1,000 people to accommodate the basic recreation needs of a community. Under state law, we can require a developer to provide 3 acres per 1,000 new residents. You do a calculation of how many new residents are going to be based on the number of lots, and then this subdivision has X number of acres it needs to dedicate. The county can then say, okay, we want land in that amount, or we'll take in lieu fee because that's not the best location for a park. We want to build a park over here, which still will serve this new development. And we'll collect enough money so that then we can purchase that land and develop a park for that to serve this community.
But those in lieu fees, you say still serve that community and pay them.
That's to serve that community, yes.
It could be clear across the county somewhere, because there's a better site somewhere else, and, I mean, you're collecting in lieu fees at various places around the county.
If the service area is the entire county, then that could be the case. Typically, there are separate service areas, in some cases, separate districts that provide that park service, and then it's within that area.
When did in lieu fees begin?
Before 1986. They were in place when I started working in El Dorado County in 86.
Huh?
They were in place before I started working in El Dorado County. That was part of the law. So I know it's been at least 1986, so at least 30 years. I don't know when it was before that.
Okay. So a community that was largely built out before 1986, without any in lieu fees, they haven't paid into the kitty. Those developments haven't paid into the kitty.
If there are no parks there or limited park services there today, right?
And yet they might get a park facility in their community or right near their community paid for by other areas of the county that were developed more completely after 86. And the funds came from there and went over here.
Conceivably, yeah, that could happen. Or the community could develop a park district and, develop it on their own, agree to tax themselves, and then the new development would come in and say, okay, you're going to be participating with this. We've taxed ourselves and developed this parkland, or it's been through volunteer effort.
Are they supposed to give the value of just the property or a developed park?
It's the land.
Just the land?
In some cases, I know where districts have negotiated the value of the land and the improvements. They're required to dedicate five acres, but the district says 3 acres and put in the turf and the parking lot for us, and we'll call it good. That kind of negotiation can occur through the review process.
So this is not a state mandate. This is a state recommendation.
That's correct.
So the issue that I'm taking with this is if you said to the developer they had to put a park in, or some sort of a facility in that subdivision, great. But to put it onto the county to say, here's some more land for you to take control of in exchange, or here's money that you can have that would not be distributed properly, I have concerns about that. And if it's just a recommendation, I really have concerns about that. I'm swinging the other way.
It's a tool, it's a means to ensure that the
developer.
new development pays its fair share or provides its fair share of parkland. It doesn't fix a problem of insufficient parkland today. And I'm sure we have a number of communities that wish there were ball fields or soccer fields, available. If you look at the scheduling of soccer fields during the season, it's booked. Sun up to sundown, on the weekends. Every rec league, every kid that wants to play soccer is trying to find a place to have their games. So I think there's definitely a need for recreation, facilities in the county. As the county continues to grow, we'll need more. And so this is a tool in order to ensure that at least with the new development that comes in, a minimum level of parkland is either dedicated or money set aside for future development of the park. And it has to be used for development of new park within reasonable distance of that project.
The in lieu fees are not the only way that parks are developed by cities and counties, correct?
Correct.
There also comes from property taxes.
It can be. If the city enacts a tax, it's passed by the...
Well, I'm not talking about bond measures, I'm talking about general fund. I mean, isn't that a legitimate, don't counties and cities routinely take parts of their general fund and
Yes.
apply it to parks?
Right.
Parks and recreation. This is just, you're saying this is an additional source of money but that's earmarked for it.
For land,
new.
for new park acquisition.
Can't use it for
You can't use it for
existing
maintenance,
improvements.
only for new land, yeah.
So when a new park is developed with these funds, then the county, through its general fund, has to maintain it thereafter.
Yes. And the reality in El Dorado, in Calaveras County is we don't have a parks
Right.
program.
Look,
What about the Feeney ballpark up in Murphy's now? Edna Feeney gave that land.
That's a
Community.
nonprofit organization that runs that.
Oh,
And all of the parks in McCallum Hill are owned and operated by the Veterans District.
yeah.
The Murphy's Community Park is owned by the county, but maintained and operated by Community Association.
It's no different where we're at.
I think it's something the county is going to have to look at more closely in the future as to how it's going to continue to provide parks for its citizens. You know, can we rely on veterans districts and volunteer organizations? Or is the county going to have to step up and develop a program that, you know, and these are tough decisions, you know, financial decisions that we'll have to look at in the future.
let me give you a story that goes to the tough decision part of it. And I think this happened slightly before my time, but certainly before your time. But wasn't there an effort to put a park near Hogan Lake? Somebody can speak up to this if they know. Near Hogan Lake, ballpark, soccer field, baseball, something like that. And the Veterans District that has a park in Valley Springs designed for that, ballparks, protested the city park, the county park, for that reason, because it would cut into their business. That's a moneymaker for them.
Parks for money?
Somebody that was here during that period of time, I'd really love to hear from. I heard this is an old story that I got years ago, so my memory of it is not really sharp. But my understanding is that it died because the veterans protested it as competition for their park in Valley Springs. So if you're saying the county needs to look into the ownership of parks and who's maintaining them and under what conditions, and if they're not for the benefit of everybody, which they should be, then I agree with that. But there's nothing you can do about the existing parks that are owned by the veterans.
No. And I think, you know, in the interim, it's the best we can do, is continue to work with these community groups and other organizations, as we've stated in our policies, to provide the best resources that we can available until we get to a point where we can afford a better parks program. And I think that these organizations, veterans districts, and the volunteer groups are doing a wonderful job, considering.
No, I think they're a fine resource, but if they stood in the way of more parks for the reasons that I mentioned, and I hope I'm wrong about that. Somebody can correct me in the press or do whatever they want to, but that's a bummer. And that shouldn't happen. And I'm all for the value of parks in a county, in a community, I think is unquestioned. The kids need something to do. I've got skateboarders on my street. The kids, the adolescents with their skateboards going up and down those hills, and I'd like to see them be able to collect in a place and have their fun, their wholesome fun, without risking their necks on Hart-Vixen Lane.
So, looking at this, I'm willing to, this is just my opinion, go to the 3 acres per 1,000, but I don't like the verbiage of unless a higher standard not exceeding 5 acres can be demonstrated, because I don't even think we can get to the 3-acre limit. I would love to see us get the parks funded. So I'd like to strike the unless the 5 acres, because all I think that is a negotiation tool against a developer to get more land and money out of him. And until I can see that our county can facilitate doing the 3 acres at 1,000 on the population, or if they're going to collect money in exchange and actually do something with the money and not just let it sit in a fund or get used for something it wasn't supposed to, I'm not willing to stay with the 5 acres per 1,000 residents.
I can live with that change. We'll be lucky to get to 3 if we've got 3.
But we got to start somewhere. We all sit here and agree that we need to provide parks for our kids, period. And why set the standard so high that it's just another taking? Leave it lower. Let's meet that lower standard first. We'll be rewriting this general plan in 20 years. If we don't have a park, maybe the next planning commission will look harder at it.
That's roughly 130,000 acres. Am I right, per resident? No, 130,000 for the county. You've got 44,000 residents times 3 acres.
Then you're still going to have to find community efforts to manage those parks. That's my suggestion. Fun.
Well, I would like to keep it the way it's written, because if you do have a community where it already has that higher threshold, then you're basically subjecting the people that are already enjoying this higher level of park enjoyment to diminished quality for a new subdivision, where I think the developer should pony up to what's already provided in that community.
Yeah, do we have a community that has 5 acres?
I have no idea, but if we do, I think we should give them the benefit of not diminishing their service.
You've got 5 commissioners here in different different districts, and every park that I can think of in my district, none of them even come close to the 3-acre threshold. But they're all community run. They're not managed and run by the county. The county may sign leases, but then the volunteer community organizations run them. So I don't know where is, San Andreas is the only park that I know of that may be county owned, is that right? Do we own Park Landing in San Andreas?
It was donated for a park. I don't know who that title is in, I don't know.
It is county land, as I recall, the one up here at the,
How big is that?
I mean, the community park down by the creek.
or off of Treat.
Yeah,
Well, the one up here where the ball diamonds are,
yeah,
that's county owned.
yeah. And I think,
And that's managed by the San Andreas Parks and Recreation District, or
Yeah.
whatever
But
they
do you
call it.
see 5 acres there?
It's a question of, are there 5 acres per 1,000 people in the community?
Okay, my math is wrong. I read
Yeah.
this wrong.
So it should
Per
be about
1,000.
1,300.
Not 130.
isn't the town hall also
So
run by
13,000.
them?
The town hall, I think, is,
Run by the park and rec?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
So,
132, not 132.
Yeah.
100, thank you.
we're at 13,200.
Right. Now, do all parks count in the inventory, whether
would-
they're run by the veterans or whomever?
Yes, I would think
All
so.
acreage counts.
Yeah, I would think so. I guess I would just say, Fawn's statement that, I don't know if we have any communities that exceed the 3 acres per thousand. I'd rather doubt it. But it's possible, and if that is the case, it would be a shame to shortchange those communities.
And I think maybe in McCollum Hill, I mean, we've got 600 people or whatever, but we've got, I mean, we may have reached that threshold. We have a ball field, a horse arena, tennis courts, park downtown. Those are all pretty sizable
Yeah.
acreage, so. Just as an example of a community that that could trigger this higher standard.
Well,
I mean, if it doesn't trigger it, it doesn't trigger it, and it may not trigger it. But if it does, I don't think we should be saying yes to a diminished level of service for people.
well, it's not a diminished level. It's
Sure
just-
it is. It is diminished.
For the new people coming in, if they don't have it now.
I want to see us get it, period.
It is diminished level. If they've got 4.5 acres per 1,000 people, and you tell the developers, oh, you only have to do 3.
Let me see
It
if
is
I-
the diminished level.
I think I got the answer here. If we can just change the language, standard of 3 acres recreation per 1,000 residents. If, consider a higher standard, if the inventory reveals it exists not to exceed 5 acres per 1,000.
Well, I think that's what it says, but just more
No, it doesn't.
shorter and more concise than
No,
your
it doesn't.
recommendation.
It says, if you've got the higher standard, you're stuck with it. This says, if you find that you have a higher standard, consider that countywide, but you've still got the 3-acre requirement.
So I would still say that I think it should be, and if there is a higher standard and you can prove it, then it should be shown. But having said that, if that's the only way that we can leave this in is to put in consider, then I would go with that. Rather than having it eliminated completely.
I'm not in favor of eliminating it, but this allows us the flexibility of considering the higher standards if that's what we find we have. We're writing something here that's really dependent largely upon 5I, which is this inventory idea, and 5H, which is the recreational master plan. We don't know what the number is going to be when we tally up for 5I, and therefore then create a master plan, which then would affect this, or this affects the master plan, either way. We don't know what that tally is going to be, so why don't we just give ourselves the ability to say, okay, that higher standard, we're going to apply that countywide, or for new development, we're going to stick with the 3. I really don't think that the question, at the end of the day, and you can come up with this, when the master plan is created, this might come to light, that the problem isn't so much acreage, as the problem is there's lots of communities that have to go quite a ways to find anything that looks like a park.
Yeah, and that's sad.
It is.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
But that means maybe some people are kind of more blessed than others, and that's not fair.
So your proposal then is that where are you putting consider?
Okay, here it goes.
Go slow.
You put a period after residence. If a higher standard not exceeding 5 acres per resident, per 1,000 residents, can be demonstrated, consider the higher standard as a county, for a countywide implementation.
I see where I mean, I understand that. I don't know that I'm the higher standard, the way it's worded. but-
Well, probably sloppy.
Is
How
what we're
about
trying to do.
if a higher level of parkland to residents exists, a higher standard not to exceed 5 acres per 1,000 residents will be considered?
That's fine.
What does the Calaveras County?
It's, excuse me, but he's working on this language, so I think instead of can be demonstrated, is found to exist.
Yes.
Or just
Right.
exists?
Exists. If
Not
a higher
found to be.
level of parkland to
Exists.
residents
Exists.
exists, a higher standard not to exceed 5 acres per 1,000 will be considered.
Correct.
That works for me.
Okay, we good?
No. What does Calaveras Chapter Code 16.24 say?
That is, and I don't know the exact language, but that is the implementing provision for the Quimby Act. That basically says that the county will apply the Quimby Act provisions,
Okay,
which is essentially this,
The 3
the
acres.
3 acre.
okay.
So we good? Can we move
Peter
on?
has his note, I'm good with that.
We're good?
That new language.
Okay. All right, so we're moving on to 5B.
Nothing for
It actually
me.
says the same thing. I'm not sure it's,
It kind of does, doesn't it?
Do we need it?
If we're going to revise it over here on 5A,
Well, is that all the Quimby Act does, though, is what's in 5A? Or is there more to it that 5B would cover?
And should 5A say park and recreational facilities? Because that was my addition on 5B was provision of park and recreational facilities.
probably it's a good idea, just to clarify.
So do we need 5B? Since Quimby Act requires we're already saying we're going to do that, and we've already said what the standard is.
Probably not.
Okay, going back to 5A, is a recreational facility by definition a park?
Well, it could be a bowling alley, couldn't it?
Well, yeah, I don't want it to be a bowling alley.
All right, so that's what I'm saying, park, if you changed it to park and recreation.
Was that your suggestion a minute
Yes,
ago?
yes.
If you're going to do that, I still want a reference to the Government Code 66477 with the Quimbley Act. If you're going to do that, I'd like to see it merged so that people have a reference as to what we're doing.
So add
Why don't we
Quimby Act.
add as provided in section 66477 of the government code, at the end of that sentence?
Okay. 5C?
Nothing.
Nothing here.
5D?
No.
Let's look at 5C again. Where are they going to get the money to do that?
Well, we're just developing standards. We're not building them.
Well, that's something that these standards would then be applied on new subdivision
Subdivisions.
projects.
Yeah.
They would have to construct that as part of the project.
Again, is this discretionary projects or any?
New residential subdivisions, it says.
Where before we said new development means discretionary, is that what this also means?
This would be discretionary, yes.
Okay.
Subdivision is discretionary. So this measure specifically addresses subdivisions, which is a discretionary.
All subdivisions are discretionary?
Yes.
Okay.
5D, I had the Kelly comment of that we don't have any lakes, right? We have no lakes?
We have no natural lakes, but, it doesn't bother me. The public looks at what's behind a reservoir a lot of
They
times as
call it a lake?
Mhm.
Okay.
Well,
Lake Toluc.
Mm-hmm. Any comments on 5D? 5E?
yeah,
That was yes on 5E?
yes.
Okay.
Are you hot too?
Yes, it's hot in here.
Burning up in here.
It's like a sauna. It's all our brain power we're
I bet
using.
it's high 70s.
Okay, so this is on,
5E?
yeah, but it's on, when I'm reading through this, it's on private land. Wait, nonprofit agencies, okay, state and federal agencies, okay. Schools. So one of the things that I got a lot of notations on out of my district was the plan basically references bicycles and pedestrians. And everywhere we go, we have road closures for the off-road vehicles, and we have developed specific paths for bicycles and pedestrians. And the OHV is a huge tourism factor in our district, especially on the forest roads. And we are battling with the forest road closures. And if we had a provision in our general plan that referenced that we would like specific paths, or we support the off-road vehicle access into our forest roads, I'm not asking to impact biking paths that are specific to that, because obviously the two don't mix. But there is no reason why it cannot be of a recreational use in our general plan. So when we go to forestry, they do take into account when they're closing our roads that our general plan, way back in the 70s, they passed a law at the federal government that basically said general plans have a role in federal decisions on public lands. And nowhere in this element can I find a place to insert those OHVs and that we would encourage or support having those in, and having trails specifically for them. They feel like they're discriminated against because they used to have OHV access that got shut down and got designated specifically only for bicycle and pedestrian, and they want to be able to fight for their right to have their access back. So that has been a huge issue in my district on the forest roads.
Are we on 5E?
I am on 5E.
E
And-
or F?
Yeah, E or F. I mean, if you're, I think the issue that might be more appropriate
Okay,
for-
would be to F.
Well, we could certainly add a measure that would similarly as, support and participate in, efforts to, have motorized recreation as well.
Okay, so she's right, and where I was wanting to address this was they specifically say non-motorized transportation. That was my issue.
Motorized and non-motorized.
Where do you see motorized?
We could add that.
Oh, okay, so, because I'm going to say it excludes it in the
Yeah,
general
just
plan,
put-
and it's a hard fight when that word is there like that.
Motorized and non-motorized. Does that work?
That would make me much happier.
Okay.
Well, not so much me, but my constituents up there.
Are
And
you,
then probably on the third line down, identifying existing proposed facilities. We don't have to say non-motorized facilities, which is all facilities.
Okay. We're on F now, right?
Yes.
We left E, okay.
Were there any changes to E?
No.
and are you guys good with the additions to F?
Yeah, that's good.
It applies to so many things, because right now the snowmobiling meetings are happening, and we don't have any way to maintain that type of thing, so.
Well, I think it's important that we coordinate with, because most of the decisions are made by the Forest Service.
Right.
And,
They are, but we have a heavy influence on
Yeah,
that.
and so if we have something in here that talks about we're going to work with them to make sure that that component of the recreation community needs are met as well.
And it's huge tourism up in our area. When those guys come up with their clubs, it's just trailer and truck after another, and they're parked at the gas stations. We love it. So, okay,
Okay.
got it.
5G, corridor plans?
Well, I'm looking at 5F, we're on that.
Sure, we're still on, we could be on 5F.
Yeah, I guess I'm just having a little trouble with the wording. Support and participate in efforts to prepare a consolidated comprehensive master plan for biking, walking, riding, and hiking / non-motorized and motorized, and then it just says transportation map.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, yep.
Well, are we talking about a plan, or are we talking about a map, or are we talking about
I
both?
think map should be struck from
Right.
that. I think a plan would include a map.
Map, right. Plan.
I don't know why non-motorized
Capitalized,
transportation is
too. I
capitalized.
don't
That
either.
doesn't need to be capitalized.
That's a good call.
Well, okay.
Well, I don't want to try that. I don't want to try that.
What does it mean to integrate future development into a regional trail network? We don't have a regional trail network now. Are we going to build one?
We kind
A
of,
trail systems tying various things together?
we kind of do.
The rim trail?
Yeah,
and-
the rim trail, and they just paved a road that ties into the commercial district to the rim trail for the hikers and bikers. And, I mean, that does exist in this county. And it is on partly county land attaching to forest lands.
And we're actually working on a, potential trail from McCollum Hill down to the river to connect with BLM land down to the river
And
itself.
those trails are heavily utilized.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the proper
Extension of the.
language would be
Coast to
integrating
crest.
future
Coast trail.
development into regional trail networks where they exist.
I think that's a good idea, because we really have a region-wide network, but we have several different networks.
Correct. We don't have a regional trail network, we have a little piece here and there.
That would seem to be correct. But it wouldn't be just the ones that exist, it would be ones that would show up on a plan as
That's why-
proposed.
Regional trail networks, you're right, not just existing ones, but
Networks.
networks. Common.
That's good.
Any other revisions to 5F? All right, 5G, quarter plans?
I have a note there.
Any revisions?
Yeah, hold on one second.
Okay.
Okay, I'm all right. I don't think that word needs to be inserted. I'm good.
Moving on?
Excuse me. Peter, linear corridor planning efforts means what?
Planning efforts that we take along these linear corridors. It seems sort of redundant, other linear corridor planning efforts.
That's,
I would just strike the word linear if that's, I mean, I don't think that needs to be in there.
that's planning speak for something? That means something to
It
you?
may not be in a straight line either.
Yeah.
So just other corridor planning efforts?
That's, makes sense to me. I mean, typically a corridor plan is something that's sort of long and narrow along corridors, or it's somewhat linear, but it's sort of redundant. We're talking about corridors, we don't need to talk.
Does this say that if you've got a corridor, that means there's development, there's communities or something, you want to try to link them together with a,
What this says, if there are planning efforts that are ongoing, we're going to participate in that. We want to have our seat at the table. Participate in, it doesn't mean develop corridor plans. It says where, so for example, East Bay Mud is developing plans for the McCollum River corridor. We want to make sure that we're involved in that so we can.
okay, by what right do we get a seat at the table?
By this
By
measure.
putting it in our plan? I don't think so.
Well,
But it's also in our jurisdiction.
yeah, it's in our jurisdiction,
Right.
and in fact, we've been participating. The
And just
whole-
like Lisa's saying with, discussions with the Forest Service about trails through the,
Okay, so this is continue to participate as we have been all along? By virtue
Right.
of our rights that we're just saying, we're not going to give up our rights to do that.
Right.
Well, and we're meeting with Alpine and Tuolumne counties over the snowmobiling because we have corridors that connect to each other in those areas. So
It's just saying we're going to, continue, but there may be new efforts to do so as well, so.
it is a good thing. This is
Oh.
going to make it happen.
Thank you. I wasn't comprehending it, Lisa, but now that you've explained it to me,
It's going to make it happen.
It's all good. It is all good.
moving along, 5H, Recreation Master Plan.
yeah. I want to know what one looks like.
And when will we get our copy?
Well, we have to develop one.
Do we have to develop it before we send this off for review or,
No, this is something we would do in the future.
okay.
That's the whole, these are things we want to do so that we have a comprehensive recreation master plan. We know where we're going to put our, how
What's the-
we're going
Yeah.
to focus.
What's the bullet point version of a master recreational?
It's going to sort of encompass a lot of these issues as far as, and do the inventory. What do we have now? What do we want to get to? How are we going to get that? Where are places that are short of parkland? Where do we have maybe in excess of parkland? Okay, so we've got plenty of parks in community X, but none in community Y. Here's where we want to direct our resources. How much do we need? What kind of facilities? Do we want a skateboard park? Do we want trails? Do we want ball fields? That's what a master plan would have. How are we going to fund it? Who's going to maintain it? Those kinds of things would be in a master plan.
Okay.
And just logistics-wise, I think, it probably doesn't matter, but the 5H, I think the inventory kind of comes before the master plan, just in sequence, I don't know. If you were reading this, it'd be like, why are you going to develop a master plan and then you're going to do an inventory?
I agree.
Can't argue with you there.
I can go with that.
Yeah.
You're just saying the order should be wrong? It should be a
I
little
would,
It should
I mean,
be
why not?
switched.
Or
It
incorporate
should.
the two together?
No, or,
We should find our inventory, then
Yes.
create a plan.
yes. I mean, if you just, kind of logically.
I agree.
Yeah.
And these were the two sentences that we pulled from
The other
5A. And so these are really sort of separate measures that we would take.
Right. Right,
We good?
right.
Yeah.
So they will be separate, but the order will be reversed?
Yes.
Good.
So we're at the opportunity for the public to weigh in on recreation, resources.
You know, can I make a suggestion? I'm sorry, Colleen. Can you have a show of hands of how many notes we all have on cultural resources? Because we might be able to bang out the whole thing here and go to public comment after the next section. Just a suggestion.
I don't have any notes on it. I was pretty good with all of it.
I got one itty bitty one.
We had the edits recommended by Julia.
And we've already approved
and
those.
we accepted those.
Yes. Are there? I don't have any.
I don't have any.
One itty bitty question is all I have. And
Well,
it's
what's your itty bitty question?
on,
Let's see if it turns into
on
something
six.
huge.
Famous last words.
Yes.
Baker. My question is, how is the information obtained now? So that comes from the evaluate, let's see, consider establishing yada, 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 to allow staff to direct the request cultural resource data. Oh, resource data, where does that resource data come from now? How do you get it when you want it?
So whenever an applicant does a study, it's submitted to the state, or the archaeologist submits it to the state, and it's archived in these various resource centers. And the one that serves our region is Stanislaus State.
And right now, we don't have an MOA with them, and
We
that's the
don't-
problem?
And so just having the MOA makes it, the transmission of the information easier. We can access their data remotely rather than have to send the archaeologist down to Modesto. Better
Could be
coordination,
better efficiency.
better efficiency.
Right.
That answered,
And
and that's everything I
time-wise.
had on cultural resources.
Does anybody have anything else?
No.
Okay, all right, so come on up.
Hey, was that?
Both recreational
a winning idea
and,
or what?
recreation and cultural resources are on the table. Thank you, Commissioner Tuno, good suggestion.
We're almost done, wow.
Well, we're going to go back, but.
We do, we're not really at the end, we skipped a few sections.
I know that.
Yes.
I know that, we're not going to do that now,
Yeah.
are we?
No, we're not.
No, okay. I just had a couple comments, Colleen Platt. Under COS 5F, local and regional trail system, I just wanted to support the whole idea of the regional trail networks idea. I like that little change because there's a lot of efforts going on all over the place. There's the Coast to Crest Trail that, is going through East Bay Mud property, and there's 27 miles of that. So that starts at our county line, and it heads up the river, and I know there's efforts at Moke Hill to go down to the river, and there's just a short section to be done there, and then there's efforts to connect that somehow to the Pacific Crest Trail up there via the Arnold Rim Trail. There's all kinds of neat stuff going on, so that's a really good goal to have in there. Thank you. And the only other comment basically was that I was under the understanding, I know there was a Park and Recs committee in this county for a while, very long while, many, many years.
We have a Parks and Recs Commission.
Yeah.
Commission, excuse me,
Yes,
commission.
commission.
And there were some very active people on that commission that did a lot of work, and I thought they came up with a plan. As far as I know, they did. They finished.
There is a draft plan that was
Right.
prepared some years ago.
Okay.
That is floating out there, that hasn't been acted on in any way
Right,
Officially?
officially.
officially, but a lot of work has been done on it, so
That
it's
would be a
not.
good place to start.
It's not like we're
Yes.
starting from scratch here. We
Right.
had a lot of people that know a lot about trails already, did a lot of research.
And they might have done some inventory
I
and
have heard a
mapping.
lot from those people.
Yeah.
Oh,
In the
okay.
public comment period, yes,
Okay,
indeed.
it's not like this is the first you've heard of it then. Okay, what wasn't mentioned here. So
Yeah.
I didn't know that you knew about that because they were disappointed that the county didn't do something with it years ago. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, well, then I think we have made it through cultural resources, and then what I'm going to suggest that we do now is continue this at our next meeting, which we would start with water resources, water quality, biological resources, and air quality and greenhouse gases.
Okay, let me make sure I got that. Biological?
Well, it starts with water.
Water resources, water quality, biological
Oh, that's
resources.
why I had a line there.
Yeah, air quality / greenhouse gases.
And
We
why
would
did we skip over those this time?
That was your suggestion that we,
That's why.
that we address the other sections that we had discussed the policies because they were fresh in our minds.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so we will be talking about implementation measures and that will be next week?
Yes, we have one item on the regular agenda, that's the continued hearing on the cell tower.
Okay.
You wanted me to bring back the solar easement provision, and I think that was the resource production element. So we'll bring that back. We'll continue the discussion on these implementation measures. And then I have circulation element and the return of the technical background report almost ready to go.
So we
The
have
changes
plenty,
are made, I just need to write up a brief, so we can have that available as well if we want to continue working. We get through all this other stuff and we want to continue
all
working on
right,
that. So-
plenty to do next week.
And packets will go out tomorrow instead of tonight.
Okay. So before I know you've got some other reporting stuff to do. We'll have our public comment period again. If there's someone that would like to address the Planning Commission?
Bill McManus, Calaveras Project. Just for the benefit of the two commission members who were not here at the last meeting, I just wanted to reiterate some of my comments so you hear it directly from me in case it gets missed someplace else. The comments that I made were, first of all, praise for the commission for all the work you do, and today's another fine example of hard work and good results. This has been going on a long time. Our general plan is closer to being finished than at any time I can ever remember since I've been up here, and you all deserve a lot of thanks and praise for the work that you do. Additionally, though, my fear is that you may be on the same track racing towards completion of the general plan, and you have an overreaching, what I consider to be out of control pot ordinance coming the other way on that track. So when they collide, there may be some unintended consequences from the marijuana laws or ordinances that are going to affect the general plan. So you may find yourself right back at the beginning, going through the general plan, tweaking it to accommodate the new ordinance, or if the ordinance somehow doesn't come forward the way it's being presented now, then you should be in good shape. But in any case, I'd hate to see all your hard work go for naught. And so I just, as you know, I'm working very hard to keep the impact of marijuana at a minimum in the county. And I think that would complement the efforts of the Planning Commission. I don't know if it's going to come back through you guys or not. I thought it was going to before it came up. The Planning Commission hasn't touched it. All I can say is that the ordinance they came up with is, I don't know where they got it from, but it is the most liberal, expansive, out-of-control ordinance you could possibly come up with. And I don't think it existed in any one place. I think it's a composite ordinance that they put together. So it is the worst of the worst of the worst. And maybe it was done on purpose so that the board or the commission could throw out the trash and try to find something salvageable in between. I hope that's the case. But in any case, I hope it doesn't impact your work or cause you to have to go back through the general plan again, accommodating ordinances that reach deeply into our community for residential areas, commercial properties, lots of bad things in it. But that would be for you to decide. So hopefully it'll come back before you and we can talk about that ordinance. So anyway, thanks again for your work. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Kevin Wright, Commissioner, I just have a quick note for you. I just want I really appreciate
appreciation for your talk on the scenic resources and promoting the tourist industry in the county. I look back on one of my old crop reports a year before this when I was kind of promoting agritourism, and I found that for the total tourists, we were wondering what the data was. It's about $150 million for the tourist industry in the county, so that's the biggest industry that the county has. Just for reference, next to it is agriculture just by itself is 30 million. So by far and away, tourism is our biggest industry.
Well, you guys need to pick it up.
Well, part of that 150 is agritourism.
There you go.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All righty. Next, we have reports.
So just two things I wanted to address. We talked about perhaps setting up additional hearings to sort of get through this. I'm maybe at a point where I'm actually going to be a little ahead of you guys rather than trying to play catch-up every meeting. But I think if we continue on with meeting, pretty much every Thursday, we'll stay on a pretty good course unless there's some desire to meet more regularly than that. It's going to be very difficult for, especially Annette and I, to sort of keep up with those kinds of meetings and just all the rest of the workload, sitting in a hearing all day. Just means that's another day that we're not getting other work done. So unless we feel like we're getting behind, we've got a ways to go still. Besides the rest of the elements, although we're making great progress, we've got 4 more elements to get through. Community plans, the land use map. I think that's it. So we've got a ways to go still before we can package the whole thing up and send it on to the board and then start the EIR process. So
You're saying once a week, possibly more than that coming up? Or
well, we talked about possibly, and I distributed
Adding a day.
calendar to you of when this room is available.
Yeah, I saw the calendar.
And we could meet more if you thought that it would be worthwhile to try to move our review along. But I think given the level of effort that is taken to get, a revised document to you, in trying to review and include and, vet all the public comments so that I can get them, my recommended revisions to you. To have more meetings is going to slow that process down for me, particularly given all the other work that we've got.
Your hopper would just get more full, and it's...
I think we'd probably move really quickly and then we'd stop and then I don't have any more work for you to do. So I think if we continue on
With the
meeting on a
every
weekly
week.
basis, that.
You guys are good with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And then if we find we need to, then we can reopen the opportunity
Yeah,
for additional day.
Secondly, Mr. McManus pointed out that the board has been working on an ordinance. I believe it was this morning that the governor signed, or maybe it was last night, the governor signed legislation that eliminated the deadline of March 1st. So the urgency rationale for adopting the ordinance that was before the board is no longer there. So the board will be holding a study session a week from Tuesday on the 16th to talk about, further discuss medical cannabis and all the provisions of the state law. They will give us further direction as they deem appropriate. It will then go through the normal ordinance adoption process, which means it will come before this body before it gets sent back to the board. So you will be addressing medical cannabis in the near future. The legislative urgency is not there. The urgency to have something in place is still there. So we want to get this, something adopted in place that provides some regulation because it is frankly out of control at this point in time. From our perspective, from an administrative perspective, we know it's out there. We know a lot of people are, trying to take advantage of the economic opportunities that are there in the business, and we're struggling trying to tell them what the county allows and does not allow. So we need to have some ordinances in place as soon as we can, but we're still working on some of those details. The 16th will help us provide additional guidance from the board, and then we'll be revising the draft ordinance and bringing that before you for your review and recommendation.
How many of these board meetings are they just telling you they want more guidance? Haven't there There was a very long meeting for that purpose alone, was there
We've
not?
had 2 long meetings, one last April, and then we had one in December, where we went through a long list of, here are issues we need to address. What do you
was
want to
there.
do with this? What do you want to do with that? So we got guidance there.
Are you
We
sure?
brought that draft ordinance, and you were at that meeting 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, whenever it was?
No, I might have missed that.
Maybe you left.
Yes, I
because-
was, yes, I
okay,
was.
I thought I
And
remember
no
seeing you in the
decision was
audience.
made.
No decision was made, but there were, a lot of public comment. We got some more understanding from where the board wants, but there are some questions that are still out there. And the opportunity on the 16th will be to help answer those questions, give us more clear direction, and then, working with council, we'll be drafting up the final version of a draft ordinance, so that you will then be able to weigh in on it.
Is the draft ordinance, will the draft ordinance be such that you like, it's à la carte, you can pick things out or throw things out?
You have the ability to recommend any edits you think are appropriate to that ordinance. And so I guess to some degree, yes, it is à la carte, as long as it all makes sense in the end.
Will an option exist that says ban it all? Is that
Yeah.
always just,
That's an
One of the
option that's
à la
out
carte
there.
auto.
That's an option that's out there.
that's not?
That is an option.
It's an option.
If that's what this commission
Do
thinks is
we
the
have to
best.
draft do we have to make that in the form of a motion here? Or is that going to be presented to us? If you don't like these, you can pick
Are we discussing something
this.
that's not
Yeah.
on the
I-
agenda?
I
I
think
think
that maybe
we're
we're
kind
getting
of
a little
future
too
tripping
far- yeah.
about this. Let's wait till we get to it, I think.
Okay, I agree.
Yeah.
But on the calendar issue, should I mark all my Thursdays as PC days
Yes.
unless otherwise
Yes,
I think that's a good idea,
yes,
for the next 2 months?
probably.
at least.
Yeah, at least.
End of the year, you're very optimistic.
I
2
hope we
months.
can get done by the end of spring, but,
Yeah. What year?
done with this phase
Yeah.
of the review.
Yeah,
Then we get a vacation?
yeah.
And then you get summertime. I'm taking a vacation this summer, so I don't know about you guys.
Great, let us know what dates we can go.
All right, so we are continuing our discussion on the general plan until next Thursday. And with that, the meeting's adjourned, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
I am going to just laugh at you.
Me?
Future tripping on the